Ohai. Volgograd. Till 1925 Tsaritsyn, till 1961 Stalingrad. The city in the southeast of the European part of Russia with the population of 1,004,763 people. 2021. Administrative center of the Volgograd region. Here are town, the most important point of the Battle of Tsaritsyn and Battle of Stalingrad. The city of regional value forms the city district. There was about 1555 on the island near the left coast of Volga, but was soon postponed for the Cape of the right coast at confluence with Volga of the River of the Queen, on which I received the name Tsaritsyn. Gidronim Queen in turn came from Turkic Sera Su. Sera, yellow, Su, water. There is also a hypothesis that the name Tsaritsyn is formed from the name of the island, which on cards of the 14th, 16th centuries was inscribed as Tsitsara. It is supposed that this Iranian name with unknown value. According to E.M. Ospalev, assumption is plausible that the image of the island goes back to an unknown medieval Arab source, and the inscription had only explanatory character. Arab the Jazeera means island. And thus, the inscription, Tsitsara, to the name of the city of the relation has no. In 1925 the city was renamed into Stalingrad in honor of I.5. Stalin. Subsequently, during the dethronement of a cult of personality of Stalin, the city was renamed again. Though his historical name Tsaritsyn had no relation to titles of the Russian monarchs, it, obviously, nevertheless was considered excessively monarchic, and on November 10, 1961 the decree of Presidium of the Supreme Council of Rus to the city appropriated the name Volgograd. The new name has artificial character, a form and combination. The hail with the name of the river has no analogues in Russian-speaking toponymy. On the place of modern Volgograd, between the rivers Dry and Wet Mechutka, there was the Horde settlement with the unknown name. The Russian immigrants called his ruins the Mekytny ancient settlement. Ulis Chuchi's coins from 1274 to 1377 are found there. Modern archaeologists didn't manage to survey the ancient settlement, as his buildings were taken away on a construction break since the moment of foundation of Tsaritsyn. The professional expedition of 1920 of the archaeologist De Ballad was interrupted with civil war, and finally traces of the Mekytny ancient settlement are destroyed by the building of the Volgograd residential district Spartanovki, which is conducted from 1938 years till present. The parking of the ancient person Dry Mechutka died here. Patronym of Mechutka is possibly given on the settlement. He meets in the central Russia and comes from other Russian, a bear, but they don't live in the steppe, and most possibly, the river is called on the existing mosque ruins. Volgograd isn't a successor of the settlement. It is located in 18 km to the north of a historical kernel of Tsaritsino and stopped the existence in 250 years prior to his basis. The Zolotudinsky settlement existed also in the mouth of the River of the Queen. Since the 15th century, as a result of the events called by the Russian chroniclers, Great Zamyatny, the Golden Horde began to break up to independent Khanates. Kazan, Siberian, Astrakhan, Crimean and others smaller. Disintegration was followed by bloody wars and stealing of the population in slavery. The Shedberg gradually collapsed and became empty during internal wars of the Horde Khans, and as a result, is finally left by the population. The Russian kingdom in the 16th century, on the contrary, passed the centralization period. It became stronger and one conquered Khanate behind another. Kazan in the 1552nd, Astrakhan in the 1556th, Siberian in the 1598th. For the period of the basis of Tsaritsyno and Subtud was the Crimean Khanate, protected by the Wildfield, the Rukop and military support of the Ottoman Empire. It was the main danger to all south of Russia. The territory of the Volgodonsk country Rius was easily dosagaima during the Crimean Nogai attacks and is unsuitable for peaceful settlements. However, at the organization of military protection, the river tradeway from Nizhny Novgorod to the new Russian city, Astrakhan, through Kazan became possible. The Volga trade were revived again. The Russian kingdom sold in Astrakhan the wood, grain, cloth, leather, wax, honey, and bought salt, fabrics, metals. Only extraction of iron wasn't enough for needs of the country, and extraction of non-ferrous metals wasn't absolutely an incense. Volga became transitant for international trade. England looked for ways of trade with Persia for purchase of silk and spices bypassing competitors, Spain and Portugal. The first mention of Tsaritsyno reached us in the letter of the merchant of the Moscow company Christopher Beru. The Russian sources for this period didn't remain because of the fires in Moscow of 1626 and 1701 when all archive of the Kazan order burned down. The word Perevolik in Russian means a narrow strip of the earth or an isthmus between two water spaces, and this place so is called because here from the Volga River to the Don River or Tanay 30 versts are considered, that is there is so much how many people can pass easily on foot in one day. Below, on the island called by Tsaritsyno, the Russian Tsar keeps in 7 versts in summertime the group from 50 Sagittary uses for protection of the road called by the Tatar word, guard. The notices and reports on the sixth travel in the country of Persia and the muscle of the company of the English merchants on opening of new places of trade collected from separate letters for 1579, 1580 and 1581, written Christopher Berry, the employee of the Mark Company to the uncle Mr. William Bearer. From the Tsar and Grand Duke Fedor Ivanovich of Avisa of Russia on Perevolovka to our voivodes the Prince Grigory Osipovich II D. Roman Vasilievich Olferyev and Ivan Afanasievich Nashakin. Which courts are released Kazan on Perevolovka for Losio closed slaves with you, with the Prince Grigory M and with Ivan and as God will give, you will make the city a jail. And you add yourself on Perevolovka would put for Tutoshny parcels those vessels how many he is niece which for Tutoshny affairs of Prigodiatits, and Luchi courts would send to Astrakhan on our Obikoda Astrakhan. It is written on Moscow of summer the 7097th 2 year of July in 2 day for a propicy of the clerk Druzina Pedalin. This first mention of 1579 of seasonal boundary guard on Tsaritsyno the island, one of a chain of the Volgograd. During 1585-1590 the Voivode Grigory's II based a number of already constant fortresses with garrisons 100-150 people who became so far the regional centers of the Volga region. Tsaritsyno, Samara and Saratov. Fortress Tsaritsyno controlled also east side of the Volgodonsk Perevolovka, the shortest. About 70 km. Distances between the Don rivers and Volga.
Instructions of the Tsar Fyodor Yonovich's Asakinu on her arrangement are found in the digit book with date -2 on July 12, 1589.
This date is considered day of foundation of Tsaritsino.
The first mention of Tsaritsino as about the city contains in the book of the Big Drawing of 1600.
And below Ballyclay of 80 versts on Volga, the island Tsaritsyn.
And against the island I fell.
To Volga. The river the Queen, followed from the river, from Don. To a channel of 90 versts, and on the island the city of Tsaritsyn.
In topography the city for the first time appears in 1614 on the card of the Tsar Fyodor Tugodinov as written as the Queen.
The name Queen, most likely, rethought on sound similarity to Turkic, Serisu, yellow or beautiful. In Turkic language a word yellow and beautiful synonyms. The river and Tsaritsyn, from the Turkic word Seri rank, yellow beautiful island. The first 10-15 years the city was located on the island which isn't plotted the time, the most probable options, Sarpinsky or Hungary, in the next years is postponed for the corner formed by coast of Volga and the Queen.
Tsaritsyn is founded as the Russian military outpost in the territory of the vassal of the Russian kingdom since 1586, the Big Nogai Horde.
Apart from Fortress Saratov, 2 in the territory. Fortress Voron is in 530 km from Tsaritsino on the Nogai Way. Future Astrakhan Post Path, and now the Federal Highway, Caspian Sea, was the next Russian settlement.
Foundation of Tsaritsino in 1589 occurred without fight because after series of defeats from the Russian troops in 1582-1586 the governor of the Nogai Horde Yerizbay in 1586 finally recognized himself as the vassal of the Russian kingdom.
But in the period of time of troubles, 1598-1613. When after suppression of a dynasty of Rurik dynasty the Russian kingdom weakened and fell, torn apart by political leapfrog, peasant wars and foreign interventions, Nogais began to be at war with Russia again. However, after the termination of the distemper Russia returned itself former force, and Bayezhdariak recognized himself as the vassal of the Tsar Mikhail Fyodorovich.
At his successor Bayakane the Big Nogai Horde finally broke up and the last blow to the Volga Nogium was struck in 1632 by Kalmyks under Taishi Hueliak's leadership.
They expelled from the Volgodonsk Kachevia to the Caucasus. Unlike Turkic peoples and Sunni Muslims, Kalmyks were the Western Mongols by origin and Buddhist Gelugpa on belief therefore weren't guided by the Crimean Khanate and became the Russian citizen. At the same time without missing an opportunity to make predatory attacks, repeatedly breaking an oath.
From 1630th years of the earth around Tsaritsino weren't challenged from Russia by none of the next governors anymore.
Cossacks, before suppression of the Bulevinsky Revolt. 1709. Being free military and predatory community were one more large regional force of that era. Also predatory attacks of Kazakhs, Karamis, Circassians were frequent. Inhabitants of fortress couldn't conduct usual country life and even mouths the cattle could only on the Sarpinsky island.
But the most dangerous enemy continued to remain the Crimean Khanate, which conducted continuous attacks for the purpose of robbery and stealing of the population and slavery.
These years the right coast of Volga by the name of the main danger was called Crimean. At all possible dangers from other people the city endured the first defeat during civil war of the time of troubles.
Tsaritsyn was among the cities which recognized the power of Lesit, who was bringing together army for a campaign to Moscow to the aid of nephew, to Falstaff Raidu.
On October 24. On November
1607 the voivode Fyodor Sheremetyev, sent by the Tsar Vasily Shuisky, stormed the city.
The Queen's city and a jail took, and monarchic traitors of the Tsaritsino people and their wives and children beat and caught, and others to the steppe ran. As traitors ran to the steppe and I, Yerlaki, behind them drove to the small river to Olshanka from the city 7 versts and fought with them. The voivode doesn't write about a crossing through Volga, and this first mention of the city already on the Volga coast is probable. Sheremetyev stayed in the city till October 1608 and led the group to Nizhny Novgorod to the aid of the imperial troops suffering a defeat. Leaving, he burned Tsaritsyn and Saratov, which was on his way. After the termination of the time of troubles, to build up again both Tsaritsyn 1615 and Saratov 1616 was necessary to the voivode Monsieur Solovtsov. In the 1668 years of a circumstance led Stepan Razin to Tsaritsino 3 times, and it after all came to an end for the city the tragedy. The Cathedral Code of 1649, which finally enslaved peasants, and the Russian-Polish War of 1654-1667 filled Lower Volga area and Don with runaway peasants and deserters.
Gathering of persons interested for robbery under Razin's atamanstvo by the Azov and Black Seas happened in the Panshini town Tudona.
The village of Panshino of Korodishinsky district now. In the winter of 1667, however, the way to the mouth of Don to him was blocked then still by the Turkish fortress Azov. Having changed the direction of raid and having dragged planes on a Preveloka to Volga, Razin in March 1667 plundered a convoy of vessels near the present village of Karavanka of Dubovsky district, thereby openly having entered the conflict with the imperial power. Despite it, the Tsaritsino voivode Andrei Yanknovsky in May 1667 gave to Razin forge bellows and other equipment and passed a thieves' flotilla without shelling down Volga, possibly without deciding to battle in case of refusal against such terrible force. So, the campaign behind homespun coats of 1668-1669, extremely successful for Cossacks. When they occupied the Yatsky town began, the Persian fleet in battle at the Pork Island is broken, Derbent, Bakur, Rasht were plundered. On events of this campaign the, because of the island on a midstream, song is put. In exchange for delivery to heavy artillery, it was authorized to Razin to float promises to stop robbery of the Russian cities and to dismiss the Cossack army through Astrakhan and Tsaritsyn, at which in May 1669 he stopped. And this time it was without blood. Razin let out prisoners from a jail and beat Yanknovsky for high cost in Imperial Tavern. There was the state monopoly for sale of alcohol. Having dragged vessels on a Preveloka back to Don, the Ataman violated a promise and didn't begin to dismiss Cossacks, and having wintered 1670 in a set of new troops, excited a rebellion against the imperial power, the first purpose in which was Tsaritsyn. 13 on April 23.
1670 the city is taken in a short siege which came to an end, an internal revolt among serf Sagittariuses who opened gate. The new Tsaritsino voivode Timofey Turgenev and the Sagittariuses who didn't change to the oath were executed, and the group of Sagittariuses sent to the help to Tsaritsino under Ivan Lopatin's command is broken at the Monetary Island. In summer of 1670 Razin occupied all Volga region fortified cities and rose to overland border of Russia on Volga, the Simbirsk line, where it was broken by the Prince Yuri Baryatinsky.
Vidluk didn't return to the Ataman. Having left the Cossacks on punishment, he ran to Don, where it was captured by the Ataman Kornila Yakovlev and loyal Irene, thrifty, Don Cossacks. Razin was given to Moscow, where he was executed 6 on June 16, 1671. Tsaritsyn is left without fight by the Khalid Razina Fyodor Shaludyak in August 1671, when the rebels, suffering a defeat, gathered at the last fortress of Astrakhan, where were broken in the fall of 1671. In the following Peasant War of 1707-1708, Tsaritsyn also appeared in epicenter of events. From Peter I's reign in the country, titanic tasks began to be implemented. Entry in the Black Sea, Azov campaigns, and Baltic, Northern War, transfer of the capital in St. Petersburg, and many other reforms. The price of these efforts were the amplifying tax and recruitative burden on peasants, forcing them to run to Don and the lower Volga, which weren't knowingly serfdom.
The administrative management finally wasn't created and represented imperial fortresses in an environment of the Cossack villages with local government which were connected by some interests with Moscow, but directly didn't submit to it.
Therefore, the ultimatums which are put forward by Peter I to the Cossack atamans about delivery of runaway peasants and the ban on the extraction of salt, breaking the state monopoly, were apprehended as violation of ancient customs. The Tsar sends the Prince Yuri Dolgorukov for gathering of runaway peasants, but Cossacks 9 destroy on October 20, 1707 group of the prince at the village of Shulginka. At the head of rebels there is a strong leader, Kondraty Bulavin. He breaks in fight of the Ataman Maximov, loyal to the imperial power, in May 1708 at Cherkassk, and itself becomes the Ataman of Army of Donskoy. The new Ataman sets a task to lift all Cossack south on a mutiny and sends to suburban Ukraine atamans torn, naked, toeless, to Volga Nekrasov's atamans, the bladder-nosed seal, Pavlova, and itself with the main group of rebellious Cossacks Azov tries to take. But after unsuccessful storm of Azov, Cossacks betray and kill the Ataman 7 on June 18. 1708, and the 30,000 army of Vasily Dolgorukov breaks the main part of Cossacks on June 30 at the Tora. Most successfully the Volga region group of a mutiny acts. 13 on May 24. 1708 they stormed the Trieste, and on June 7 Tsaritsyn, having executed the commander of defense Voivode Turchinin. The Astrakhan governor Apraxin writes about it. Thieves, having taken away to itself from vessels which into Astrakhan didn't allow, work people many number, to Tsaritsino day and night the earth was brought down and the ditch was filled up, and having swept together firewood and anything pitched to the wood and birch barks, lit, both by great force and attack, and that fire that obsidian all the town was taken, and Afanassy Turchinin was killed, great rage of an eunuch, cut the head. And within the scribe and the gunner and 2 Sagittariuses, and others which were in a siege, the officers and soldiers sent from us and Tsaritsino, having sorted for guard, and a gun and a dress, swearing much, in thieves' circles left to be free. After it, the sovereign, from those thieves loddest any animosity of this July 20 descent my regiments to God's help and yours our merciest sovereign prayers took the city of Tsaritsyn, and those villains of thieves Cossacks beat many number and live poverty. And Zavotchik greater I ordered to myself to Astrakhan, another all Cossacks and others which with them were, and Kamyshenskaya which in came to help to them under Tsaritsyn, ordered on Tsaritsino and on Donskaya road to hang up, worthy revenge Ekidnino generation is vosprinat.
And Kamyshensky inhabitants I ordered to take away all, except the most aged and women and small children.
That also will disappear. After Bulavin's death rebels are separated, Nekrasov leaves to Don. In Tsaritsino there is Pavlov's group, but on August 2 she is beaten out by the imperial group which came from Astrakhan. Ignat Nekrasov appointed gathering of the broken parts of rebels at the small homeland, the village of Golubinsko, but the suitable imperial troops break it in the last fight on August 8. Nekrasovцы leave to then still the Turkish Cuban, execute the remained rebels without pity, placing gallows along roads. Volgograd, the region was weakened by the Bulavinsky revolt, the subsequent to repressions and transfer of the Russian troops to Sweden for conducting northern war. The organized Cuban disorder in August 1717 used it the Crimean Khanate of Bakhti-Jeri. Except the Crimean Tatars raid Nogais, Circassians and Cossacks who left under the leadership of Nekrasov, taking of slaves and their sale in the slave markets of the Ottoman Empire were a main objective.
Tactics of robbery consisted in rapid blocking of the Russian fortresses while other part of robbers rushes into villages and fascinates the young people capable to sustain a hike to the Crimea, leaving old men and children. In August 1717 fortresses and villages on an arch of Penza-Saratov-Tsaritsyn underwent blow of this attack. It is stolen in slavery according to different data from 15 to 30,000 people.
Tsaritsyn is also blocked, and the inhabitants who were out of city walls are killed or taken away in slavery. Several thousands of prisoners managed to be beaten off, attacking the Tatar groups which are slowed down by production. The luck to attack was promoted by the Cossacks Nekrasovцы acting as conductors of Tatars, natives of the Volgodonsk entre Rios. Having left into Cuban, they formed the religious community based on old belief and the moral code, Ignat's precepts. They considered Peter I Antichrist, other Orthodox Christians Niconian traitors of ancient piety, and treated them without pity. For prevention of predatory attacks in 1718 construction of the Tsaritsino sentry line began, and the Don Cossacks are strengthened by dragoon regiments.
In the next decade after suppression of the Bulavinsky revolt, the imperial government finally subordinated itself Cossacks. Elections of the ataman on the Cossack circle were cancelled and now the ataman was appointed by the government.
Since 1721 the Cossack regiments were included into military board. An analog. Ministries of Defense.
From this year transformation of the Cossacks from opponents of autocracy in his right stronghold began. The most part of Cossacks will faithfully serve an imperial surname up to suppression of a dynasty at execution of imperial family in 1918.
In 1734 was under complete control of the central power. But it isn't spontaneous as before. The Volga Cossack army is based. Wikisource logo in Wikisource's texts on a subject. Description of Tsaritsino of 1769. Peasant War of 1773-1775 became the last event of an era of wars and mutinies of the Volga region.
The revolt arose among the Yatsky Cossacks because of strengthening of the imperial power among before free Cossacks and in 2 years took the Urals and the Volga region. Strengthening of serf oppression became the reason of war. Even the last legal right of serfs to complain of the baron is liquidated by Catherine II's manifesto of August 22.
On September 1767. The peasant could suffer from any lordly arbitrariness, beginning from whims and fuming mockeries of people with mental diseases. An example, Soltachik. Therefore they easily believed in the kind, real Tsar, and the impostors giving themselves for imperial persons often used this belief. Yemelyan Pugachev, who since spring of 1773 was giving himself for Peter III and who announced decree on release of peasants, became the most successful. Numerous groups of Cossacks, runaway peasants, Volga Tatars and Bashkirs began to join him. This army, which is quickly created since October 1773, began a siege of Orenburg. It proceeded till March 1774 and is removed by the suitable army of the General Golitsyn. The long and unsuccessful siege is considered Pugachev's mistake. Instead of expansion of a zone of a mutiny, he drew up the main forces to one point and lost a strategic initiative.
Since spring of 1774 he is forced to take away the groups down Volga from the imperial army pursuing him under the leadership of Suvorov, but for the Volga region cities he looked the coming winner.
The cities gave in after fast storm, and is frequent without a fight, meeting Pugachev by bell ringing, as it was necessary for the imperial person.
Tsaritsyn, which was defended the courage and organizing abilities by the commandant Sipliatov, became the only thing the city which didn't surrender to the impostor.
Collecting in the city of Olnot changed to the oath and receded from the cities of soldiers and Cossacks taken by Pugachev, he managed to bring together about 6,000 fighters at 73 guns. The artillery was divided into an overland part on fortifications and on floating Volga batteries. On August 21. On September 1774 storm of Tsaritsyna began Pugachevitz. The parties entered fighting contact around modern Spartanovka. The Tsaritsyna group proceeded to fortress. Inspired with the first success, Pugachev brought troops on the Volga coast closely to fortress walls, and artillery arranged to Siberia Gor. The height near Volgograd -1 station, the beginning of Nevskaya Street from a platform through railway tracks. In dangerous proximity from the Tsaritsyna tools. The sticking artillery duel ended with full defeat of Pugachevsky positions, then from Volga struck floating batteries the main part of rebels and to force them to recede. It wasn't succeeded to take straight off Tsaritsyn, and on a long siege there was no time left. He was pursued by Suvorov. Pugachev receded to Black Jara, where it was broken in battle at the Selenikovi Band on August 25.
With small group of the immediate environment I ran to the Akubinsk steppes, where by them it was given out in exchange for forgiveness of the imperial power on September 15, it is executed 10 on January
21. 1775 in Moscow.
The brave Commandant Siplitev received a general rank in a manor near Tsaritsyna which he called Alexievka,
in honor of the died son Alexei. Now the settlement Gorky.
Volgodonsk, the region till 1758 years was a buffer zone between peaceful provinces of the Russian Empire to the north of Voronezh and Akachivyama and Kanates of the Caucasian and Central Asian region.
During this period Tsaritsyn remained a boundary settlement with military and administrative functions. Supply warehouses for the waterway, a quarantine of the disease from the floating vessels, small trade. Military up to 400 people, and a small amount civil were the main population. In 1645 the Voivode Gnovsky writes about the subordinates. All pedestrian Sagittarius is 200 people, from the same from 200 people at monarchic affairs on the Krasnikny yard and customs in the heads both in Selavolniks, and in a mandative log hut, and in police officers, and on the Zhitny yard, and at regimental any monarchic grain and other stocks in Selavolniks and in watchmen 50 people. To be 1664 year in the city the first stone building street. Jean Baptist Church, and only in decades following appeared. Church of the Assumption in 1718 and Sacred and Troitsk in 1720. The reforms which began with Peter I on the European sample considerably strengthened the country. The Russian Empire considerably surpassed the East neighbors in the organization of army, the industry, state system, and from 1750th years the Russian expansion to the Crimea, the Caucasus and Central Asia begins. Tsaritsyn remained in the back of these conflicts, former opponents are expelled. Noga are forced to peaceful life on the Russian political conditions. Helmiks, the Volga region Tatars, Bashkirs, are restrained at boundaries considerably to the south of Tsaritsino. The Crimean Khanate, the Caucasian people. Therefore from fortress I began to turn into the small peaceful town. Development of boundary territories of the Russian Empire consisted in tactics of expression of the nomadic people on the south and the east, Vigorazovany territories, a chain of the fortresses connected to the defensive line and settling of a border area by Cossacks. The protected space was recognized as safe and accustomed peace immigrants, the new line was created to the south, and military garrisons and the Cossacks were transferred to it. Traditionally new stage in development of Tsaritsino can be considered 1775 when the Tsaritsino Central Line and the Volga Cossack army are liquidated and function of the southern border of Russia the Azovo-Mazdatsky strengthened line accepted. The territory of the Volgodonsk Rio stopped being the purpose of predatory attacks, and in 1780 the Tsaritsino County living already peace country tenor of life is organized. The city began to grow suburbs and in 1820 the new plan of urban development which wasn't needing a fortification and shaft anymore is approved.
Active settling of the adjacent territory by peasants immigrants from the central provinces which founded the oldest villages which now were a part of the city began with this period.
Ijo, Elshanka, Bekatovka, Machetnaya. On modern Spartanovka's place. Except the Russian citizens, by Catherine the Great's invitation the German colonists Bernguteri lodged, having brought with themselves new technologies and new social tenor of life. The first school, drugstore, coffee shop, the first landings of potatoes, mustard and tobacco in the Tsaritsino region happened in colony Sarepta, on Volga.
Plants on processing of mustard opened in 1812 operating and now the mustard and oil milling plant, Sarepta, became the first plant of the future of Volgograd.
To the middle of the 18th century in Tsaritsino first of all the food industry what was promoted proximity of salt developments of Elton, fish resources of Volga and the Caspian Sea, and melon growing developed. For all Russia merchants delivered salt, mustard, salty and sun-dried fish.
The earth of the Volgodonsk Rios remained a zone of risky agriculture with frequent droughts, frosts and invasions of a locust therefore among residents of Tsaritsino and vicinities, seasonal works.
In modern terminology were developed a shift method of work. They were employed by barge haulers, chumaka the swine. From a word to drag. On a Praveloka to drag vessels from Volga to Don. out in 1862 of the Volga-Don Railroad with an exit to Don at Kalisz gave to Tsaritsyno huge advantage in the competition for transfer of the increasing freight traffic on Volga-Don's transfers. The road came into the city from the south along the Olshanki River with turn at the Volga coast to the Volskia station, present ways of the Volgograd cargo port in Voroshilovsky district where the first railway station of the city was created.
Success as regional transport hub in 1868 was set by the Grai-Saritsensy Railroad, which connected the city through the station of Dirt to Baltic.
The Rigo-Orlovsky Railroad,
and Moscow.
The Ryazan-Uralsky Railroad. By the direction. She came into Tsaritsyn from the north and having rounded Mamayev Kurgan along the beginning of the Saratov Post path.
Lenin Avenue now.
Approached the present territory of Volgograd -1 station. For connection of Volga-Don and Grai-Saritsensy lines, the crossing point from the Volskia station to Mamayev Kurgan along Volga across the territory of modern Centralnaya embankment is constructed.
For the increased passenger traffic, the monumental building of the Tsaritsyno station, which became a site of Tsaritsyno and pre-war Stalingrad, is built.
Death of this building is imprinted in the photo, which became a symbol of the tragedy of Stalingrad. In 1899, for an exit to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, the construction of a branch from the station Tikhoretsk to Vladikavkaz Railroad to the Tikhoretsk station, now Volgograd -2 station, in Tsaritsyno, is completed.
Both stations connected a crossing point through the viaduct in the floodplain of the River the Queen.
It is filled up in 1960. From the city center and the Tsaritsyno station to Tikhoretsk, the first route of the city tram in 1913 is laid. In 1900, the line of the Volgodonsk Railroad is prolonged up to the station, dashing the Southern Railroad, opened the Rostov and Donetsk direction.
Tsaritsyn won the competition in the Volgodonsk region, where on the shortest distance it is possible to deliver the Caspian oil, the Donetsk coal and the Ural metal.
The river message across Volga during this period also endures industrial revolution. To replace archaic bands of barge haulers, Bulyana and receiver wheel steamships of the large companies, shipping companies come. The Caucasus and Mercury, the plain, across Volga, and in 1878 down the river started walking the first ever oil Zoroaster tanker. After cancellation of the serfdom in 1861, rapid growth of the industry of the city began that was promoted by factors of convenient transport, Volga and the developed railway system, and territories, the flat steppe without foreign constructions. It allowed to build huge industrial complexes with the infrastructure and industrial settlements at once.
In 1880, on the plate of the modern park of the Central Park of Culture and Leisure, construction of the Nobel Town, thanks to which Tsaritsyn became oil not began. Here the Caspian oil was poured from river tankers in railway tanks for transportation in the European part of the country.
The proximity of crude oil gave an impulse to oil processing development, earned kerosene and oil production.
French, the Joint Stock Ural and Volga Metallurgical Society, in 1897 constructed the steel Tsaritsyno works, later rented by the Dumo Joint Stock Company. With assistance of the English firm, Vickers, the Tsaritsyno cannon plant, which specialization remained also in 100 years, sea and field artillery of large calibers, is constructed. By 1913, district Tsaritsyn, on number of inhabitants, more than Kard, overtook many provincial cities. It was the period of explosive growth of construction of residential, production, public and entertaining buildings, hospitals, schools, hotels.
Also promptly infrastructure developed. An electrical network.
1880 Dino Town.
Phone.
1885 Dino Town.
A water supply system. 1890. Movie theater. 1907. City tram. 1913. Bridges and congresses through the Queen are built. In the 1910 years, efforts of the priest Ilyador Tsaritsyn became the informal Russian capital of Orthodox and monarchic extremism, Black 100. He won huge influence among citizens thanks to the talent of the speaker, preacher and prior of the monastery built by him on sacred Dahov's donations. The subject of performances Ilyadora was easy and clear for the simple people. The good Tsar is betrayed by bad officials, journalists, Jews and the intellectuals. His sermons brought together many thousands audience, and except an imperial surname he didn't spare any authorities. Gradually I entered the conflict with all local and central government. Public beating of the police officer and other citizens. 10 crowd of Ilyadorovits became on August 23. 1909 a last straw. With the governor Tatishchev, the synod and Stolypin. I could achieve an audience from Nicholas II, presumably through the friend. Till 1912, after the worst enemy. Grigory Rasputin, on which the Tsar forgave him and I forbade his detention by police. In the next decade his influence fell and in 1922 he fled to Norway. Before the revolution in 1917 the grandiose temple, Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, was almost finished, consecrated him in 1918.
Took down in 1932, revived cathedral in 2021.
Growth of the population and the housing estate was interrupted from the beginning of World War I and the subsequent to her shocks.
The beginning of war was marked in Tsaritsyno by a Massachusetts revolt of the mobilized soldiers and their wives.
Up to 1,500 participants. Because of refusal of the authorities to pay to families mobilized a grant for which suppression it was necessary to call troops. In collisions on streets of 19 people were killed and 25 were wounded. Then in the years of war industry gained development in the city. The large garrison, 150,000 people, was placed in Tsaritsyn. There arrived tens of thousands of evacuated. The arisen density. The population entailed typhus epidemics in 1915 and 1916. For work at the plants of the city over, Austro-Hungarian prisoners of war were brought. Continuous growth of high cost of products and necessary consumer goods at inactivity of owners of the industrial enterprises caused to increase compensation. The sharp growth of the strike movement in 1916.
Owing to aggravation of social and economic crisis, the February Revolution was met by the population of Tsaritsyno with delight.
In 1917, after the October Revolution, the unity of the country was gradually broken. On places the power was taken by the most organized and adjusted on armed struggle groups with strong leaders. In Tsaritsyno, Bolsheviks, airmen and Minin who proclaimed the Soviet power on October 27. On November 1917 acted as those.
Thanks to existence of large-scale industry in the city, there was considerable Massachusetts of the proletariat which sympathized with Bolsheviks that promoted the fast statement of the new power.
Soon Tsaritsyn became a red outpost in the south of Russia. From the territory of the area of Army of Donskoy, the commander of the Don Army, General Krasnov, made 3 unsuccessful attempts to take Tsaritsyn. July-September 1918, September 1918, January 1919, February 1919. The important role in defense of Red Tsaritsino was occupied by the commander of the North Caucasus Military District, Joseph Stalin. Events of this period in the Soviet historiography are described as defense of Red Tsaritsino. The 4th attempt White began to take the city successful. This time the blow to the city came from the southern Caucasian direction. The city is taken by the Caucasian army of the General Wrangel in May 1919, however he had to recede in December 1919 and a simultaneous attack of the Red Army from the west. The 37th Division of Dybenko and the east. The 50th Division of Kovtak. On January 3, 1920, the city is finally taken by parts of Raqqa. Fights in vicinities and city line of Tsaritsino caused huge damage to municipal economy and inhabitants. From terror on both sides, a large number mobilized and civilians died. But perpetuation of memory of the dead belonged to winners in civil war. On February 8, 1920, the died Red Army men are buried in a Massachusetts grave on the Alexandrovsky Square of the city. The area is renamed into the area of the fallen fighters. In 1921 and 1922, the grain yield suffered from a drought, and hunger came to the city.
It happened earlier, but this time consequences were aggravated with violent withdrawal for needs of the warring Red Army of grain and introduction of policy of military communism.
These measures were entered without any mercy and common sense. Under the threat of execution at large country families, the last was selected, including seed grain.
Hunger in the Volga region of 1921-1922, with number of the dead from malnutrition and the accompanying diseases in several million people, became a result.
When the Soviet power realized consequences, fully it couldn't help starving as the gold reserves of the Russian Empire are lost, transport arteries are broken off by the going civil war. Because of refusal of the USSR of recognition of imperial debts, it became impossible to obtain the international credits. Food reserves were absent. In the Tsaritsino province, most of the population starved. The desperate people began to storm trains and steamships, to run to areas where there is a food. Caspian fisheries, Central Russia, Caucasus. The huge help in rescue from hunger to Tsaritsino was rendered by the foreign charitable organizations. American administration of the Help, International Working Committee, Italian and Swiss missions of the Red Cross.
In April 1922, at hunger peak in Tsaritsino and province, they developed 853 dining rooms where received hot meals or sack lunches of 668,900 people, about a half of all population.
The foreign help is curtailed in 1923 when civil war ended. The good harvest of grain was reaped and regular transport connection began to be restored. Even during fights of 1919, the Soviet power considered that on population and the industry the city outgrew scale district long ago, and this year the Tsaritsino province was formed. Upon termination of civil war, peaceful life began to return to normal. The surplus appropriation system and elements of military communism are cancelled. An economic relationship began to be defined by the new economic policy. Actively, agriculture and the industry revived. The city restored growth rates of the population. In the first peace years, the Tsaritsino enterprises are restored. Barricades. Former Tsaritsino cannon plant. Red October. Former Dumo. Chemical factory, Lazar.
Former Nobel town. and others.
During the Massachusetts campaign for renaming of settlements, disposal in toponyms from all connected with the monarchy and religion, in honor of recognition of merits of Stalin on defense of the city on April 10, 1925, Tsaritsyn is renamed into Stalingrad, the river the Queen and the Pioneer. Within industrialization of the country in Stalingrad in short-term state district power plants.
1929.
Stalingrad tractor. 1930. The shipyard.
1931.
Hardware plant.
1932.
Are constructed. Already existing plants were entered in the Stalingrad tractor and tank cluster. Red October, cooked constructional, armored and weapon grades of steel, barricades, wooden tools, by hardware plant, large details, the tractor plant assembled tractors and tanks, the Stalingrad State District Power Plant gave electricity. For training of engineers and workers, the Stalingrad Tractor Institute.
1930.
And numerous few are created. Two more similar clusters were developed on the basis of Chelyabinsk tractor and Kharkiv tractor plants. From the tractor plant in the north, railway tracks are expanded to the shipyard in the south of Stalingrad. Sotstarodka for workers are constructed. The tractor plant is designed on the project of the American architect Albert Kahn. Start of the plant was carried out by the American experts. Saint T-1 became the first tractor of the plant. The license copy of the American McCormick Deering 10/20. Tractor T-26. The license English Vickers MKE tank. Became the first tank. In the first half of the 1930th years, the Stalingrad engineers put completely domestic models in production.
Saint T-5 naughty.
1935. Tractor and legend of the Soviet tank construction T-34. 1940.
Tank. During the pre-war period, the city and all lower Volga region will affect by hunger of 1932-1933.
Besides, during Big Terror of 1937, the leadership team of the city considerably suffered. Tuk. 1934-1935, it is shot in 1938.
Semyonov.
1936-1937, it is shot in 1937.
Varakis.
1935-1936, it is shot in 1938.
Smorodin.
The deputy 1937-1938 is shot in 1938. At the same time, during the specified period, there were huge improvements in key spheres of life of the city.
In the decade, general school education is introduced, the illiteracy among children is liquidated and considerably reduced at adults. For the pre-war period, more than 200 educational institutions from schools to higher education institutions which are basic for the city also now are opened.
Tractor. Mechanical. Institute. 1930. Industrial Teacher Training College.
1931.
Medical Institute. 1935. Become since 1940 paid. Private practitioners of certain doctors of the imperial period were succeeded by Massachusetts coverage of the population in factory and district clinics and hospitals. The electric power, a water supply system, the sewerage, public transport, radio, telephone communication in large quantities entered life of citizens. In process of approach of the front line, there was a threat for railway lines of the Volga region. In this connection, the rate of General Headquarters made the decision to create the Volgograd. For her construction, removed railway tracks from the first site of BAM built before war, mobilized local population, involved prisoners and prisoners of war, and constructed the road in record time. The southern site of Volgograd. Stalingrad, the top bastionchik for communication with the line Astrakhan-Erbek. About 250 km long, is built for September-December 1941. The northern site of Ilovo, Saratov, Sviazk, 992 km long for March-October 1942. For winter of 1941, the Soviet troops managed to stabilize the front line in the Battle of Moscow to reject Wehrmacht from the capital, having for the first time interrupted series of his military victories since 1938. An Anschluss of Austria.
The spring campaign is intended to develop this success, but the approach of the Red Army beginning successful in May 1942 to Kharkov turned back the Kharkov accident, as a result of which the considerable part of the Soviet southern front was surrounded and almost destroyed for the Soviet troops. Rostov-on-Don is lost.
From formed the ambassador of death of the southern front of a gap in the Soviet defense against Voronezh to Rostov. In May, the Wehrmacht struck the dispersing directions. Group of 8 armies on northern to the Caucasus, the 6th Army in the direction of Stalingrad. In the summer of 1942, the People's Commissar of Defense of the USSR, 5.
Stalin adopted Order No.
227, to a step backwards.
By the end of July, the Soviet 62nd and 64th armies, after heavy fights, receded for Don, across which there passed the front line, to Stalingrad on a straight line. There were 70 kilometers.
The first attempt to take Stalingrad was made by the 4th Tank Army Gotha. On August 1, having forced Don at the village Semlyonsk and moving on 300-kilometer curves to the south from the city, having bypassed thus the main forces defending, on August 4 it appeared in 30 km from the southern outskirts of Stalingrad at the Abganerevo station.
There was a fight, a forehead bluntly, to the tankmen of the 13th Tank Building Tanaskina, transferred from a reserve and who were hardly in time to be unloaded in these hours at the neighboring station.
In the next 2 weeks, Germans will try to break to Stalingrad. The parties will mutually destroy the equipment and will exsanguinate each other, but nevertheless this site of defense will stand. Having changed the direction of the main blow, the Wehrmacht made a new attempt of break to the city, now on a straight line. The 14th Tank Building of Wehrmacht on August 22, having forced Don at Vertichego, they punched the 70th kilometer corridor through the defending Soviet parts, and on August 24 left to Volga, having occupied Spartanovky's outskirts. The 87th Rifle Division covering Stalingrad from this direction is destroyed by bombing by the German aircraft on a march to Don when tried to liquidate the German base at Vertichego, didn't manage to beat up ground and is finally broken by the German tanks.
Not to allow take straight off a northern part of the city. Persistent defense of the 10th Division of the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, consisting of women of the 1077th Anti-Aircraft Regiment, armored group from repaired on St. tanks with crews from workers testers of battalions of the Stalingrad National Militia. Support of Wehrmacht from air was carried out by the 4th Air Fleet, in which at the time of fight it was concentrated to a third of all planes of Luftwaffe on East Front, and on August 23 he made the first massive air raid.
About 200 Samolyot to Stalingrad, which ruined the central part of the city and the Volga crossings. Evacuation of civilians is carried out not completely. For August 23, 1942, in the city there were not less than inhabitants. The possible reasons of delay: work of citizens at the defense enterprises of the city and Massachusetts, involvement of all inhabitants, including women and children, on digging of entrenchments and anti-tank ditches which surrounded the city.
Appeared in a trap when the break to the city was made, and the configuration of the developed front began to represent the Soviet strip of urban development along the coast of Volga with several kilometers and the German adjacent steppe.
Luftwaffe began bombing of piers and sinking of any vessels, without dividing them into military and civil. Death of the steamships, Joseph Stalin, and composer Borodin, became one of examples of this tragic destiny. On August 24, the German corridor to Volga near Rososhka. Germans began to supply surrounded by air. In a week the corridor is restored by them. Was succeeded to cut 35 Guards shooting divisions, and on August 29 the group of the Colonel Gorokov managed to reject Germans from Spartanovki. The last week of August of the party rearranged for new fights. The Soviet 62nd Army and 64 armies orderly departed from external contours, 50 kilometers from the city, directly to the outskirts of Stalingrad. Germans brought parts to blow to the downtown. On September 5-7 the 1st Guards Army tried blow from steppe through the ancient settlement to come for connection with the 62nd Army and to surround northern group of Germans, but the German defense did.
On September 13 the Wehrmacht struck blow along the river the Pioneer and at her mouth left to Volga again, having cut parts 62nd and 64th of armies among themselves and also occupied the Bald Mountain, dominating over the area to the south from the downtown. In the German break there were numerous local centers of resistance. Separate groups of the Soviet soldiers held the fort, incapable to sustain direct hits of shells of buildings. One of such examples is defense of the Stalingrad elevator.
Along with it approach to the plant began Red October. For Germans it was successful half. Mamayev Kurgan is taken, but numerous attacks to the plant broke against the Soviet defense. In the night from the 14th for September 15 for correction of a catastrophic situation, the 13th Guards Rifle Division of the General Rodintsev was transported through Volga to Ermanovsky district. I occupied strong buildings, suitable for defense, beat off on September 16 Mamayev Kurgan and brought down an offensive rush of Germans, having forced them to get bogged down in cruel street fights. The 12th Armored Brigade made on September 18 blow from Kotlubany to Stalingrad for the purpose of an environment of northern group of Germans, but they solved a plan, concentrated significant forces of anti-tank artillery on an edge of the attack and shot almost all tanks. From the second half of September the Wehrmacht entered new parts from the adjacent steppe and attacked the area already on all extent of the city along Volga, except the most southern Krasnoarmysky district.
To the middle of October Germans managed to surround and break Andrusenko's group defending northern contour of Stalingrad from the ancient settlement to Sportanovka and to take Traktorozavodsky district at the end of the month.
On all extent of the front of battle were conducted fiercely and densely, often on the scale of the house or the shop, for an entrance, the landing, the apartment. In Stalingrad both parties, instead of usual division on infantry, a platoon and a company began to use the strengthened assault groups with mortars and flamethrowers.
Actions of infantrymen in street fights were supported by the numerous artillery batteries located at Germans in the adjacent steppe at the Soviet army beyond Volga.
To the middle of November 1942 the Wehrmacht the continuous attacks took almost all center and the north of Stalingrad, except the last separate sites. Spartanovka, Ostrov Lyadnikov, Plants, Red October and T10, pens a knot of defense. Nil, Pavlov's house and adjacent houses. As the coming party, Wehrmacht had to spend much more resources than defending Soviet ways of supply to Stalingrad are stretched, the Iron Way isn't ready, stronger German parts were removed from flanks and went to Stalingrad, they were replaced by weaker German allies, Romanians and Italians. The Soviet Party, having completed the construction of the Volgograd in October 1942, I had a maneuver opportunity on the Stalingrad front. I saved defensive reserves and I could it is reserved to throw them to Serafinovich in the north and to the Lake Big Head in the south from Stalingrad. On November 19 the Soviet command began the Operation Uranium, having struck from two directions and having passed about 250 km across the German backs southeast and Don fronts met at Kalisz, having finished an environment of the German troops. The problem of operation consisted in blow from the north in 300 km from Stalingrad on weak Romanian divisions and cutting off strong German front supply, rapid captures of all space between the Chur and Don rivers which laid down for Germans additional water barriers. Till the last moment the Wehrmacht didn't suspect about the forthcoming approach.
Harmoniously the logistics for supply of tank brake worked. There arrived 3 cavalry corps.
The 8th, the 3rd and the 4th. Which in the conditions of snow winter were more mobile than infantry. Later it would seem almost one fight for aggressors and environment was surprise. Without believing in the increased power and military skill of the Soviet troops, Hitler and OKV represented current situation accident, is refused to Polius leaving of Stalingrad and attempt of break. As help to him the group of Don armies under Erich von Manstein's command had to act, support surrounded to a deblocada, the air bridge organized by Göring. For this purpose it was necessary to punch the Soviet defense and to hold the positions in Stalingrad and in the Caucasus. The Soviet command thought on a more substantial scale. The Supreme Rate conceived the Operation Saturn, according to which from Don there was a blow in the direction of the Sea of Azov and an environment of group of Wehrmacht in the Caucasus. In case of successful realization of operation for Germans of a consequence would be comparable with defeat near Stalingrad.
For this purpose it was necessary to break quickly surrounded in Stalingrad and rapid 400 km blow to leave to Rostov-on-Don. In December 1942 the parties began to realize the plans. The Soviet ports began to restrict Germans to Stalingrad and to the middle of month Polius had territory of Stalingrad and the adjacent area 70 long and 30 kilometers wide where the Wehrmacht showed desperate and resistance.
Effectively it wasn't succeeded to adjust air Göring Bridge. The German transport aircraft sustained serious losses from air defense and fighters of the Soviet army.
Manstein began approach on December 12 according to the Operation Thunder Snow. With tactical cunning, the blow is struck not in the place of the greatest rapprochement.
40 km of Germans at the Chur River and too distant. 120 km to the direction from Katalnikovo. The first blow of repeatedly superior forces was assumed by the 51st Army. It set the task at any cost to constrain approach before approach of a reserve. By December 16 Manstein passed a half of a way to Stalingrad. The surrounded Germans heard a fight cannonade. The fate of battle hung by a threat. Desperate defense. These events are shown in the movie Hot Snow. The 51st Army won 7 days. On December 12, 19. Necessary for expansion of the new line of defense of the 2nd. Armies down the river Moskova whom Germans couldn't overcome the spent offensive reserves anymore and stopped on December 23 fruitless attempts. To Polius there were 40 km. The Soviet part couldn't strike fully to Rostov, having in the back of not beaten Manstein and Polius. Therefore the Operation Saturn was reduced to the Operation Small Saturn.
On December 16, the 1st Guards and 6th Army struck the 8th Italian Army, and the 3rd Guards Army on the German Howlett Group about 300 km wide from Novakalidvi to Surovikino at the front.
Italians in 3 days were surrounded and almost completely beaten. Stronger Howlett Group could recede with fights. And again the Soviet approach became for Germans a bolt from the blue. Raid of the 24th Tank case of the General Baden of 2 airfields at the village of Tatsinskoye when the Soviet tanks shot the German transport planes which were taking off in panic can be an example of this suddenness. The Wehrmacht began to select parts from the southern group Gotha and to throw them on the central direction. The Soviet command, having suddenly changed the direction of blow from central to southern, on December 24 struck Group Gotha and forced her to recede from Stalingrad on 200 km. Thus, the Wehrmacht, the recognized master of maneuverable war, itself was crushed as a result of maneuvers of the Soviet troops. The fact of superiority of the Soviet army in winter conditions became a result of the second half of December 1942. Plans of rescue of the surrounded 6th Army became unrealizable. Hitler gave the order to Kleist on derogation of the Caucasian group of Wehrmacht from Ordzhonikidze to make up in order to avoid a possible environment. Polius received the order to hold on as long as possible to delay the Soviet troops at Stalingrad. The surrounded 6th Field Army controlled a contour around Stalingrad 170 km long in which airfields, the last hope of Wehrmacht, were located. Their capture became a priority of the Operation Ring. On January 10 there began approach the Don front, attacking the same positions from Don to Stalingrad, as itself defended in August 1942. By January 17 Germans lost all steppe zone around Stalingrad, including the last airfield nursery. Through a blizzard separate groups of the broken German parts departed to city ruins.
Having made a regrouping, the Don front began on January 25 approach to urban development with blow from Gumburg for Red October from where the 62nd Army made counterblow.
Connection of fronts happened on January 26 on the western slope of Mamayev-Kurgan. The Wehrmacht is cut on the main southern and northern group which commander appointed Streicher. Hitler sent the congratulatory telegram with Polius's assignment of the field marshal's rank, with the note that in the history of Germany there was no case of capture of the German soldier of such high rank, hinting at suicide.
But Polius chose capture and signed capitulation on January 31. The northern group of the plot gave up on February 2.
The Red Army won the Battle of Stalingrad. This victory became critical in war by the number of total irrevocable losses. They killed who died of wounds in hospitals, missing persons. Of the being at war parties, the Battle of Stalingrad became one of the most bloody in the history of mankind.
The Soviet soldiers minus 478,741.
323,856 in the defensive phase of battle and 15885 in offensive. German about card, the German allies. Italians, Romanians, Hungarians, Croats. About card people, the death toll of citizens it is impossible to determine even approximately, but the account goes not less than on tens of thousands.
Removal of threat of capture by Wehrmacht of Lower Volga area and the Caucasus, especially oil from the Baku fields, became military value of a victory. Sobering up of allies of Germany and understanding of that fact by them that war can't be won became political value.
Turkey refused invasion into the USSR in the spring of 1943. Japan didn't begin the planned Siberian campaign. Romania, Mihai, Italy, Badoglio, Hungary began to look for opportunities for a withdrawal from a war and the conclusion of separate peace with Great Britain and the USA. The damage caused by war was huge. 41685 houses, 95% of pre-war housing stock, are destroyed. In the city there were 32181 inhabitants from pre-war card. From them 30666 in the least affected Kirovsky district, in other all combined regions of 1515 inhabitants. And tidy were about 200,000 corpses of people and more than 10,000 corpses of horses, all bodies could bury only by July 1943. The city was filled with unexploded shells and bombs. On the former lines of fights there were not removed minefields. For mine clearing of the city engineer parts are left, they neutralized 328,612 mines, 1,169,443 shells and bombs. Only by July 1945 on the city it became safe to move. For prevention of epidemics from the decaying tombless bodies, inoculative points and polyclinics are developed. Doctors of the corresponding profile are sent to the city. Though there were isolated cases of infection with typhus, Massachusetts epidemics are stopped.
Post-war hunger of 1947, when in the city recorded about 700 patients with dystrophy of the 2-degree, extreme degree of exhaustion became one more trouble.
The destructions caused to Stalingrad were non-uniform on areas. Armansky, Jasinski and tracked Rozovodsky, according to whom within 6 months the front line of street fights walked or destroyed almost completely. Kirovsky district, which avoided the German occupation, received serious destructions from shellings and aviabombings. Among least victims, the settlement of Bukatotka, which has the luck not to be on the direction of the main blows of both parties. It became the center of Stalingrad for 1943-1945. All city services coordinating restoration of the city are placed here. Heroic work in the shortest possible time restored defense industry. The tractor plant in 1943 began repair of equipment, and in 1944 gave to the front the first collected tanks and tractors. Began with summer of 1943 work the Red October and barricades plant. By 1949 industrial output exceeded pre-war. On December 26, 1943 the first restored tram route, the center, is open Red October. And by the end of 1944 all access of Elshink, the center, tractor earned Red October.
The first stage of restoration of housing stock of Stalingrad lasted from February 1943 to 1945, when the most part of resources of the country left on war. But nevertheless, even in these conditions there was a restoration of housing. The most Remont got out of the destroyed buildings, and hundreds of buildings managed to be restored, sorting more injured on a repair brick and reinforced concrete structures. In the conditions of the shortage of male builders, female construction crews, the Cherkasovsky movement were organized. Pavlov's house became the first restored object. For individual construction, 2 residents of Stalingrad loans were issued. By 1945 the population was lent for 48.5 million rubles.
By May 1945 card square meters of municipal and departmental housing, 240,000 meters. 12663 houses. of individual housing are restored that made 37.4% of pre-war. But nevertheless there was not enough housing for card citizens. On average 2.8 squares of housing were the share of the end of war on one inhabitant. About 40,000 people lived in dugouts and ruins. The second stage began since August 22, 1945, when Stalingrad was transferred from regional subordination to Republican level, and in the budget of Roosevelt since 1946 restoration of Stalingrad is brought separately.
The resolution on priority allocation to the city of the German captured construction equipment and property was accepted. The Children's Railroad, organized based on AFC engines of railway troops of Wehrmacht, became one of examples of use of this equipment. According to the program of restoration, the construction trust, Stalingradstroy, is created.
Total number of builders in 1946 was more than 30,000. The considerable number of the German prisoners of war was engaged at works. Large-scale buildings gave an impulse to development of building industry. On resources of adjacent fields of limestone, plaster, rubble stone began to produce local building materials, and in 1953 exceeded the level of 1947 times.
By this year in Stalingrad there were card square meters of housing that for 11% exceeded an indicator of 1940. The floodplain of the River of the Queen, which from the moment of foundation of the city was densely populated and built up small industrial enterprises, mills, tanning and mustard, the plants remained the only not restored territory.
Ruins of these constructions were taken down or filled up with soil in the 1960th years.
A considerable part of recovery works was performed by prisoners of Wehrmacht and other countries of the Axis, who only in city boundaries were taken by about 9,000 people.
For their contents, Camp No. 108 with the center in Bukatotka was urgently created. Almost all prisoners were in extremely depleted state. They received a ration on the verge of starvation 3 months from the moment of a November environment. Therefore death rate among them was high. By June 1943 from them 27078 people died, were on treatment in camp hospitals of 35099 people, sent to others of the camp of 28098 people. Only about 20,000 people were for health reasons capable to work at construction, were added to them later taken prisoner after 1943. After peak of the first 3 months death rate was normalized, prisoners worked the usual working day and for the work got paid. Till 1949 8,976,304 man-days are fulfilled, wages of 10,797,011 rubles is paid up. On which in camp shops they bought products and household means of prime necessity. The last prisoners of war are released to Germany in 1949, except received criminal terms for personally committed war crimes. The 1950th years became dawn of architecture of Stalingrad.
In the first post-war years the most necessary objects were restored, and since the beginning of new decade large-scale building of Stalingrad by the monumental buildings in style of a Stalin Empire style defining the image of the city and today began.
This decade architects Simburtsev, Levitin, Maslyev created the image of the model socialist city. In uniform style all historic center of the city, the Stalin area is reconstructed. For creation of a new grid of streets the historical planning repeating contours of fortifications was changed. Reconstructed Mura Street opened in 1950, which set style of construction of post-war Stalingrad for a decade became the first. Sacrificing the houses of merchants Tsaritsino which survived in fights, the Soviet architects created post-war masterpieces. Geroev Avenue, Pavshik Bortsov Square, Central Nea Embankment, Railway Station Volgogradovai, Lenin Avenue, which are more than 60 years the main architectural complexes of Volgograd. Citizens in large quantities moved from the gouts and barracks to the Stalin-era buildings till our time, making considerable housing stock. Volgodon Canal put into operation in 1952 of Stalin became one more symbol of the one city.
As many architectural objects of time of a cult of personality of Stalin, together with the transport functionality it glorified the being at the head usher of the father of the people.
Together with the channel, the 24-meter statue of Stalin, at the time of construction the biggest statue to the real person was constructed. On the central embankment there began work the landing stage.
The existing enterprises of the city as a result of modernizations considerably increased the pre-war amount of products. The new plants began to work.
Wire and rope. 1954. TS Primera Projekt Chet -2. 1956. Oil processing. Na, Lukoil Volgogarabutka, 1957. Aluminum. 1959. The Construction and Architectural Institute was founded. 1951. And the existing earlier educational institutions received new spacious buildings. Medical. 1950. Pedagogical. 1952. Musical School. 1957. After Stalin's death in 1953 during de-Stalinization, all monuments to Stalin were demolished, all objects called in his honor are renamed, including on November 10, 1961 Stalingrad is renamed into Volgograd.
The resolution about elimination of excesses in design and construction recognized wrong and wasteful style of construction of the 1930th, the 1950th years. By the end of the 1950th years, gradually there was a refusal of a Stalin Empire style in architecture. The complex of buildings of Polytechnical Institute designed in 1960 became the last objects in such style.
New buildings began to be under construction in more functional style, without large-scale decorative accessories. Sports Academy, 1960, Ministry of Internal Affairs Academy, 1967.
Serial production of standard series of houses in the form of the combined panels, which received the unofficial name of 5-story apartment blocks, is nationally applied to the accelerated and economical solution of a housing problem.
They are constructed in a large number in one and all districts and the residential districts of Volgograd, and now make a huge part of housing stock. In memory of the Battle of Stalingrad, the Memorial Mamayev Kurgan complex is constructed 1967. New industrial facilities are put into operation. Volga Hydroelectric Power Station, 1961, Engine Building Plant, 1963. Specialization of Volgograd, it was added with chemical industry. Caustic Soda 1967, Plant of Technical Carbon 1964. In 1965 the power line Volgograd, Donbas, the world's largest line at the time of creation according to the scheme Varki, is started. Modern transport infrastructure, where the main role belongs to motor transport, began to develop. In 1964 Astrakansky Bridge is put into operation, connection of streets to the second longitudinal highway began. Khrushchev's removal also began. Brezhnev's government in 1964 did not cause evident changes in a city architecture, except change of 5-story apartment blocks, with more comfortable Brezhnetka. The economy of the USSR lost the accelerated rates of development characteristic of 1930, the 1960th years, and from the beginning of the 1970th years entered the stagnation period. In Volgograd in the 1970th years are constructed. Theatre for Young Audience 1970, Sports Palace 1974, Chep-3 of 1977. In the last Soviet decade are constructed. Volga, 1980. The plant of boring equipment, 1981. House of Pioneers, 1981. The first stage of a metro tram from the Lenin Square stations, Komsomol and Pioneer, 1984. Museum Panorama, Battle of Stalingrad, 1985. For the period 1950-1980 from the next regional centers were lasted out to the highway. In 1989 a million resident was born. After the collapse of the USSR in 1991 catastrophic recession in all functions of the industry and municipal economy began. All public construction is frozen, and for a decade some objects were in a condition of an unfinished construction. The second turn of the high-speed tram, 22-story hotel at Predmostnaya Square. In 2005 it is reconstructed to the apartment house Krasnoznamenskaya. The 16-story chemical body of the Polytechnical University. It is completed in 2010. Moryatnik. For 2019 in a condition of an unfinished construction. In the 1990s Volgograd became the homeland of the financial pyramids which reached federal level. The Russian house Selenga Kopia Invest, the Russian real estate. Till 1993 the Volga region real estate. From the middle of the odd years construction became more active. In 2009 Volgogradsky Bridge, in 2011 the second turn of the high-speed tram. The trade union stations, Theatre for Young Audience, Alshanka. In 2014 the overpass in the settlement of Kumrik, in 2015 the traffic intersection on the lower Alshanka. Tulaka. The first considerable objects of transport infrastructure for post-Soviet time is put into operation. Many residents, the military personnel of the Volgograd military garrison, were involved in post-Soviet wars in the North Caucasus and in the Five-Day War of 2008 in South Ossetia. The city underwent a number of acts of terrorism. In 2018 Volgograd hosted matches of the FIFA World Cup. Also in the city the fan zone for football fans is built. To Volgograd there came such famous bands as Arash and Kadabostany. Volgograd and its vicinities, space picture of Landsat -5, on June 21, 2010. Volgograd, as well as all Volgograd region is in our zone Moskotime. Moskotime. Shift of the applied time concerning UTSIS plus 300. According to the applied time and geographical longitude average solar midday in Volgograd comes at 12:02. Volgograd is located in the lower Volga current on its west bank with various forms of a relief. Volga Hills, the southernmost tip, east part of the city, is occupied by the Sarpinsky lowland. It divided Sarpinsko-Davansky Hollow beginning Novinovka and lasting between the first and second terraces of Volga practically through all city from the north on the south, on which, for example, there passes the first longitudinal highway of the city. In east parts a Kanalya Krasnoarmysky district Sarpinskaya Nizam. It is provided not only the Sarpino-Davansky Hollow by width in several km, but also actually Sarpinsky lowland, and also in this area sites by Eugenia coming into line of the city district Volgograd are located.
Within the city, the Volga-Akubensk floodplain also enters the first terrace of Volga and a coastal strip on the west bank and estuarial parts of the steppe rivers and beams falling into Volga near Volgograd, to which city district the Urtov Islands Monetary and Sarbinsky and the peninsula Zerepta in Krasnoarmysky district. The cities also belongs to it. Soils of the Volga-Akubensk floodplain within the city district Volgograd are various.
On terrace slopes since 55 meters above sea level below on marks of heights, the faces light brown alternate with sites of meadow brown and brown desert and steppe soils. The coastal strip of Volga is lower than its first terrace, and the peninsula Sarepta on the right coast and all rest to Zavolzy a lion coast are provided meadow, and Liso meadow brown is desert steppe. In a combination to various intrazonal soils, the Krasnotsvetny dark-colored hills having noticeable fertility are available. The Smolntsommy Chernozemidny, merged by soils dark and Krasnotsvetny, inundated and impoverished alluvial Krasnotsvetny, brownish, dark-colored soils in reservoirs of a coastal strip. Also in the territory of inundated and other part of the city district there are both solonetzik soils and saline soils, and different soils of floodplains and beams from dark-colored to red, yellow, brown color soils.
The most northern region of the city, the settlement of hydroelectric power station, begins at the coast of the Volgograd reservoir formed by a dam of the Volga hydroelectric power station and has year-as waters of 15 meters above sea level. All other city located below a dam has year-as 13 meters below sea level or in the Volga-Akubensk floodplain.
The highest point is located in the residential district Volgograd in the northwest of the city on one of dome-shaped eminences. Many heights in the Volgograd region have the dome-shaped or Plateau-Brasny form, sometimes owing to long-term influence of forces of the aeration connected with solar radiation, air temperatures from 25 degrees and above, alien aeration owing to impact of temperature drop. Frequent transitions through zero to cold season and under the influence of various types of rainfall and sandstorms. Biological and chemical aeration is less relevant owing to dryness of climate.
On an underframe waterjet around the National Fair, on concrete goods and around a ground stop, 51 Division of Guards, and is more than 160 meters above sea level, and also near Gumrip there are heights of the same form above 150 meters above sea level.
The part of the city, adjacent to Volga, low, with height 40 meters above sea level, at a distance of 3 km from Volga is a chain of flat hills with height of 140 meters. Namayev Kurgan, 102 meters. Vold Mountain and others. Within the city the small steppe rivers Dry Mechyutka, Wet Mechyutka, the Queen, Alshanka flow into Volga. Distance from Volgograd to the nearest large towns. On highways. Street. Petersburg tilde 1668 km. Moscow tilde 964 km. Voronezh tilde 568 km. Samara tilde 864 km. Saratov tilde 393 km. Kamish tilde 198 km Kazan tilde 1087 km. Irals tilde 838 km. Halach on Don tilde 81 km. Servikino tilde 139 km. Luhansk tilde 460 km. Volsky tilde 27 km. Leninsk tilde 69 km. Atara tilde 791 km. Volgodonsk tilde 310 km. Rostov-on-Don tilde 479 km. Stavropol tilde 584 km.
Sochi tilde 1047 km. Alista tilde 290 km.
Piatigorsk tilde 667 km. Grozny tilde 800 km. Astrakhan tilde 434 km. Ektai tilde 1600 km. The climate is moderately continental. An average amount of precipitation minus 267 mm a year. The winter is soft with frequent thaw, summer hot and long, at all times years are possible sharp temperature drops. In 1940 also the temperature minimum 33 C and a temperature maximum plus 42.6 C were recorded.
The vegetable zone of Volgograd, the dried Novonazlakovy steppe, usual for the Eurasian steppe, occupies only a separate northwest part of the city with northern biases of the area to the north from the airport. The rest of the city is located in a wormwood Dernovino, serial opustanenity steppe.
In the areas relating before building to Serpino-Dovanskaya hollows were widespread and remained, and now there were small sites of Solontsevati, Solonchakovati thickets in combination with cereal and wormwood desert steppes. Soils are non-uniform, light brown and brown solonetsik prevail, sites of dark-colored and color soils meet. Wood vegetation within the city is poor, exceptions, floodplains of the steppe, small rivers and the coast of Volga. The oak groves which ran wild gardens of the thrown duckas meet. On slopes of beams, steppe grassy vegetation. The Urgeninsky mineral spring as some other rare natural zones are included in the list of regional nature sanctuaries. The fauna of Volgograd is generally provided by invertebrates, birds, rodents. In green zones of city line it is possible to meet snakes, lake frogs, hares, hedgehogs, bats. Influence of the city favorably affect the number of such types as a house sparrow, a blue rock pigeon, a rook, a grey rat, a house mouse, providing them with a plentiful forage from activity of the person, but it is negative on other animals, destroying their habitat.
Volgograd represents the linear city located along Volga 5 km wide and up to 65-70 km long.
However, for preserving of the status of the million-plus city to the city were attached the 28 settlement and the island of Sarpinsky. It changed a natural configuration of the city on paper, having included in it not populated territories, but the city remained linear in the basis.
From the creation in 1589 of the Sentry fortress and forming since the end of the 17th district town, the main and only artery for the city was Volga.
Considerable width of the river, complexity of its overcoming, complexity of construction of bridges, flooding of the left coast, lack of water currents of the right coast predetermined the linear, crest, to the river planning of the city. Further growth of the city was performed in the northern and southern direction along the Volga River. In Soviet period, architects continued linear city building. After the Battle of Stalingrad, the city is restored in the pre-war borders, the city joins border settlements, the plants along the river are under construction. In Soviet period, residential massifs mistakenly were under construction. The plants divided from the river, the railroad, lines of electric trains, in the tramways and the highway. To the middle of the 70th, growth of the territory of the city in the northern and southern directions sputters out. Jasinski district removed to the west from the river is under construction. By 1975 the city takes a modern form except for accession of rural territories of 2010. In the 1990s there is an accretion of urban areas due to liquidation of green zones.
The housing estate near the industrial enterprises which appear that expansion of the city in the centers of districts of the city aggravates environmental problems of the city. The city appeared in the economic, transport, socio-cultural and town planning problems interconnected with each other which were the reason of depopulation of the population.
After the collapse of the USSR, some of the main enterprises were closed and social institutions of districts of the city.
The Soviet principle of resettlement of residents on areas of finding of the plants led to transport problems when the population of areas of the closed plants began to move to new jobs in other districts of the city.
Other means of transport do not participate in life of the city or are poorly developed. The city requires the problem resolution of transport infrastructure. It is required to it. The bypass road, additional longitudinal backups routes, increase in number of the crossroads connecting longitudinal highways, the allocated strips for public transport service, modernization of schemes of public transport service, development of the electric transport, development of the underground high-speed tram, restriction of personal vehicles, return to uniform distribution of economic activity in each district of the city. Volgograd is characterized by an average ecological state. The main pollutant of the atmosphere is the motor transport, -70% of emissions.
Among objects of the industry, the greatest emissions characterize metallurgy, chemical and fuel industry.
More than a half of emissions is the share of Krasnoarmeyski district, the highest index of pollution in Krasnoyarsky district. In general on the city the increased content of nitrogen oxides, formaldehyde, phenol is observed. The index of pollution of water in Volga varies from 1.36 to 2.04.
City biological treatment facilities through which there passes the main amount of sewage are located on the island Hungary.
Is sewage which underwent cleaning on these constructions does not exceed the maximum permissible content of compounds of nitrogen, suspended substances, copper, zinc, fluorides, phosphates.
The status of the city of regional value at Volgograd is set within the administrative territorial device of the Volgograd region according to the Charter of Area and the law of the about the administrative territorial device of the Volgograd region area of October 7, 1997 No.
139 odd. Within the municipal device of the Volgograd region, since 2006 the hero town of Volgograd is the only settlement. Since 2010. In its structure forms the city district. Tsaritsyn was founded as an outpost on the Volga tradeway, and from 1589 to 1708 which appointed voivodes all to Ponozovi towns. The cities of Lower Volga area administratively obeyed the Kazan order which is responsible for river trade. In modern terms combining powers of the province and the ministries of internal affairs, foreign affairs, trade for the region. In 1708 Piatai undertook territorial reform, having cancelled the voivodeships which became an anachronism, and divided the empire into provinces, counties and volosts. Since 1797. Tsaritsyn treated the following provinces. Kazan, 1708-1719. Astrakhan, 1719-1773. Saratov na Mesnichestvo, 1773-1796. Penza, 1796-1797. Saratov, 1797-1919. The Tsaritsyno county could be formed only in 1780. Earlier it was not represented possible as because of attacks of nomads peaceful life could be only in fortifications.
In 1919 Tsaritsyn itself becomes the center of the Tsaritsyno province, which in 1925 together with the provincial center
Tsaritsyn is renamed into Stalingrad. In May 1928 the province was a part of the Lower Volga region, which in June 1921 is transformed to the Lower Volga region. In 1932 Stalingrad became the regional center of the Lower Volga region. During this period Saratov, Astrakhan, Alista were administratively subordinated to it. In 1934 Lower Volga is divided into the Stalingrad and Saratov region. In 1936 the Stalingrad region is divided into the Stalingrad region, the Astrakhan district and Kalmyk by the Asar. In 1961 the city is renamed into Volgograd, area respectively in Volgograd. After transfer of Fortress Tsaritsyn from the island on coast of the Queen and Volga. About 1605-1615.
All territory of the city was located about 200 years in a fortification approximately on a rectangle of the modern territory.
1. Street. Zhelny Baptist Church. 2. Crossing of Krasnoznamenskaya Street and Lenin Avenue. 3. Crossing of Lenin Avenue and Geroyev Avenue. 4. Central Nea Embankment.
A building exit out of fortress limits begins with the beginning of the 19th century. To the city increases the Tsaritsyno and Zatsaritsynsi Vorstadt. By the beginning of the 20th century the city occupies the territory in a rectangle.
From the south it is limited to the Elshenkaya River, from the west streets of Sherpovitskaya Marshala of Rokossovsky. Nowadays the second longitudinal highway. From the north streets of Hiroshima, the 7th Guards Crew. Thus it is the territory of modern Central and Voroshilovsky districts. Only place of other modern territory of the city existed.
According to Strelbitsky's card of 1871.
The Azovsky Volist village is the market. Approximately on a road fork to Volsky and the hydroelectric power station settlement. At Drymechivka, Machetnaya and Portyanovka. In the place of drying of food clothes by barge haulers. Between Dry and Wet Mechivkaya, Zhuravka on the place of the lower tractor settlement. From the ancient settlement according to Wet Mechivka to Volga on the place of modern settlements the Cherry Beam and Verkhanesky 10 anonymous farms were located. To the south from Tsaritsyno the Okradinsky Volist included. Alshanke, the farm of swordsmen. Na Nikitin Street in Karovsky district. Bekatovka, the Joe, the farm Salty. Na Solyanaya Street in Karovsky district. Sarepta and several adjacent anonymous farms near Sarepta made the Sareptinsky Volist.
Through the period 1900 to 1930 years at the length up to 30 kilometers from the center along Volga there were industrial settlements at the plants from which other districts of the city which absorbed settlements of the former Tsaritsyno county grew.
For post-war time urban development began to fill waste grounds between settlements, and on north side of the city formed a continuous strip of housing and industrial zones. In the south there are still considerable sites of the empty steppe between a residential and manufacturing sector.
In 1890 the expanded Tsaritsyn for the first time is administratively divided into parts at numbers 1 and 2, a prototype of future urban areas.
The river the Queen became border of these parts. The present central district became part No. 1. Unofficial there was a name Old City. And present Voroshilovsky district became part No. 2. Unofficial Zatsaritsynsi Vorstadt.
In 1920 there was an additional division on one more border, to the ways of the Grai-Saritsynsi Railroad going parallel to Volga.
Now on the same remain embankment through Volgograd -1 station there is the Volga Railroad. Part No. 1 remained the old city, but from it part No. 3 Politnovskaya passing behind a railroad cloth from Volga, unofficial was allocated. Zatsaritsynsi Vorstadt remained part No. 2 and, but from it part No. 4 the site of urban development with the unofficial name, Gift Mountain, existing more than 150 years was allocated.
In the 1920th years adjacent villages became industrial settlements and received new, revolutionary names.
On July 21, 1920 Sarepta became the city of Krasnoarmysk, future center of Krasnoarmysky district. On September 19, 1921 the settlement of the Urals-Volga plant became the Soviet settlement, and in 1925 the Sopsyoky name of Rykov, future center of Krasnoyarsky district. On November 17, 1925 the village Dijau is renamed into the settlement of Airmen. On January 7, according to other data on March 30, 1925 the settlement of Olshanka is renamed into the settlement of Minin.
Since 1926 construction of the industrial settlement of Dzerzhinsky at the Stalingrad tractor plant under construction, future center of Traktorozavodski district began.
From the second half of the 1920th years in the USSR in connection with large-scale industrialization economic division into districts of territorial units, fine-tuning of administrative division under industrial enterprises, energy, transport and human resources begins. Instead of rural counties and city parts it is entered regional and urban areas. On this reform in 1931 included above-mentioned industrial settlements in city boundaries and divided Stalingrad into 5 areas. From the north on the south along Volga. Dzerzhinsky. Area of modern Traktorozavodski district. Rykovsky district. Modern Krasnoyarsky. Ermanovsky district. Modern Central. Mininsky. In 1933 it is renamed into Voroshilovsky in honor of Klim Voroshilov. And Krasnoarmysk, Sarepta, became Krasnoarmysky district. In 1935 division is changed to 4 areas. Dzerzhinsky, Ermansky. With 1948 Stalin, with 1961 Central. Voroshilovsky, Kirov. On this division in Dzerzhinsky district is included Rykovsky and Kirovsky district, in honor of Sergei Kirov is formed of Voroshilovsky and Red Army. In 1936 Jarzynski district is divided on Jarzynski, Krasnoyarski, Barricade and Traktorzavodski districts. In 1944 Kirovsky district is divided into Kirov and again educated Red Army. In 1953 Jarzynski district entered Stalin and Barricade Krasnoyarski. In 1970 Jarzynski district is educated again, through it the territory of the central district to the west of a new city dominant, the second longitudinal highway departed. In 1975 Sovietsky district is divided into Soviet and again formed Voroshilovsky. By the end of the 1930th years the border of the city purchased a modern form, and for the next years changed slightly. The industrial settlements which entered later city boundaries did not merge with urban development and are separated by fields and waste grounds. The airport Gumruk, Vodstry 1959, Gorky 1963, Silyansky 1965, the mountain glade 1966, May, mountain, water -2010.
In 1975 change of borders between urban areas comes to an end, but accession of territories from adjacent rural areas continued.
Borodishinsky, Dubovsky, Kalachevsky districts.
The last change of borders of the city took place in 2010 when all settlements entering earlier the city district of the city of Volgograd were administratively combined with the city of Volgograd. March 20, 2010 by the resolution of the Volgograd Region Duma on March 11, 2010
20/652 about inclusion in structure of the city of Volgograd of settlements. The structure of the city included the following settlements.
To Sovietsky district.
The industrial settlement Gorky, the village the Gerbel, settlements Water, Mountain, the mountain glade, Babel the Queen, May. To Traktorzavodski district. Industrial settlement of Vodstroy, settlement of Zarekny. To Jarzynski district. Industrial settlement of Kumruk, Farmstone Bayarek, Ovrishny. To Krasnoarmysky district. Industrial settlement of Yushny, settlements of a name of the 19-party Congress, Salt. To Kirovsky district. Farm Beketovsky Rift, Solitary Men, Volgostroy, Hares, Kozavad, Cross, Forest, Leshehev, Pavlovsky, Sandy the First, Sandy the Second, Sandy the Third, Fish Breeder. In 1589 until 1710 Tsaritsyn was controlled from the beginning of the basis of Tsaritsino on the voivodsky form of government. The city authorities were represented by the voivode. As a rule, they were taken from Slushly people. The Tsaritsino voivodes quite often had to postpone economic questions and to engage at attacks of nomads of the Volga region or at peasant wars. Some of them died in these conflicts. Turgenev 1670, Tershinin 1708. The voivode was appointed by the Digit order, approved by the Seigneurial Duma and obeyed the Kazan order knowing Volga in the trade way, ordered city garrison from Sagittariuses, gunners, Cossacks, was responsible for defensive works, police, tax, judicial functions. Among functions of the voivode exotic today is city head were care of timely visit of church and the correct fasting of citizens during Orthodox Lents. The role of the modern mayor's office was played by the mandative law cut which paperwork the clerk who is also approved by Moscow with the subordinated scribes managed. On Petrovsky provincial reforms in 1710 the Russian Empire was divided into provinces. Commandants who submitted to governors began to run the cities. The main function of the commandant remained to the same as command of military garrison and defensive works, with minor city economic tasks. In 1818 Tsaritsyn eliminated fortresses and became the usual peaceful city, and the existing army division is transferred from a condition of the increased combat readiness of Serf battalion to team for disabled. That is security division in the back. The power in the city is divided into civil and military branches. The civil branch of the power from 1818 to 1917 was headed by the mayor. From 1934 to 1991 the supreme executive body of the government of the Volgograd region. The Stalingrad region and the Stalingrad region was the executive committee of the Volgograd Regional Council of People's Deputies. The central party body existing in the Volgograd region. The Stalingrad region and the Stalingrad region. From 1934 to 1991 was the Volgograd Regional Committee of the CSU.
Thanks to the courage and managerial ability, history of the country was become by the first secretary of the Stalingrad Regional Committee and a city-town committee of the All-Union Communist Party.
Bolsheviks. In days of the Battle of Stalingrad, Alexei Semyonovich Chuyanov.
In 1992 elections of the mayor were won by Yuri Chekhov, who was already directing Volgograd 2 years as the chairman of the executive committee of the City Soviet of People's Deputies. Further became mayors. Evan Yashchenko 2003-2006, Roman Grebenikov 2006-2011. Since 2011 direct elections were cancelled, city heads began to be appointed.
Sergei Sokolov, Deputy. 2011-2012 Valery Vasilkov. It and the subsequent heads, deputies of the Volgograd City Council. 2012-2013 Alexander Chunikov 2013, Irina Guseva 2013-2014. Since 2015 the head of Volgograd and respectively, the head of the Volgograd City Council is Andrei Kosolopov, city manager. He is a head of administration. The former mayor of Kamyshin Alexander Chunikov. Local government authority is the Volgograd City Council consisting of 48 deputies elected for 5 years. A management official in the city is the head of Volgograd appointed by the Volgograd City Council. In 2011 the Institute of City Managers, which priority of responsibility are economic problems of the city, unlike the head of Volgograd which priority were representative and political functions, is entered.
From 1729 to 1854 Tsaritsyn, which does not have own coat of arms, used an emblem of the Tsaritsino Dragoon Regiment billeted in the city minus 2 Precresceni silver sturgeons on the red field.
In 1854 the city received the official coat of arms. The French board divided into 2 parts, in which top part the coat of arms of provincial Saratov is placed. 3 sterlets on the blue field. In the lower part on the red field, 2 Precresceni silver sterlets. The board is topped with the tower crown about 5 teeth corresponding to the status of the district city. After 1917 this coat of arms was not used.
In 1965, after obtaining the status by Volgograd, the hero town is accepted the coat of arms operating till present. In the top red margin, hero's star and teeth of the fortification symbolizing Fortress Stalingrad. In the bottom blue margin, a gear wheel and a sheaf of wheat as symbols of the developed mechanical engineering and agriculture.
The flag of Volgograd represents a panel of red color with the image of a municipal coat of arms. As unofficial symbols of the city, silhouettes of sculptures, motherland, are very often used, die in the last ditch and the grieving mother. The city day is celebrated on the first Sunday of September. On February 2, day of capitulation of the German group in the Battle of Stalingrad. In 1943.
On September 12, day of remembrance of the spiritual patron of the city Alexander Nevsky, Ulis Juchi Sereberk, according to one of versions poisoned in the capital.
Now the village of Tsarav of the Volgograd region. For January 1, 2021 on population, the city was in the 15th place from 1116 cities of the Russian Federation. To the middle of the 19th century, the population of Tsaritsino was measured by several thousand people. By 1913, the population of district Tsaritsino reached card people. Until the end of the 1980th years, the population steadily grew, and in 1989 Volgograd became the million-strong city. In 1995 and in 1998 the city lost this status twice, and then returned. In 1999, as a result of depopulation of the population, the city finally left this status. In 2002, as a result of expansion of city line, inclusion in structure of the city of the next industrial settlements, Volgograd became the million-strong city again, however once again lost this status in 2004 as a result of the continued reduction of population. In 2010 the city line of Volgograd included all industrial settlements and rural settlements which were a part of the city district of Volgograd. It already for the third time gave to the city the status of the million-strong city, also in 2013 for the first time for post-Soviet years insignificant increase in population. 51 persons is noted, but in 2014 depopulation is again recorded, and for January 1, 2015 number was 424 persons at Volgograd on the 15th place according to the list of number of the cities of Russia. That's indicators of birth rate and death rate negative. On 1,000 people in 2014 was born 11.0 and 13.0 died. On demographic indicators for 2014 districts of the city differ among themselves. The highest birth rate in Sovetski district -12.7, the lowest in central -9.7.
The highest death rate in Krasnoyarsk and Krasnoarmeysk areas -14.7, and the lowest in Sovetsk -11.4.
National structure of Volgograd on a census of 2010. Russians -92.3%. Armenians -15200. 1.5%. Ukrainians -1.2%. Tatars -9760. 1%. Azerbaijanians -6679. 0.7%. Kazakhs -3831. 0.4%. Belarusians -2639. 0.3%. Koreans -2389. 0.2%. Other nationalities less than 2,000 people, also, not specified nationality.
Volgograd, Volsky ancient settlement, Krasnoslobodsk which are among themselves in the 1/2 transport availability unofficial form the Volgograd agglomeration which population makes not less than 1355,000 people that puts it on the 10th place on population among agglomerations of Russia.
After the collapse of the USA, the industrial capacity of Volgograd is used partially and already suffered considerable losses.
The enterprises, depending on the industry and managerial effectiveness, differently endured transition to new economic way.
The power complex. The Volga hydroelectric power station, state district power plant, CHEP-2, TETS-3. Did not reduce electricity generation and heat. The enterprises carry out modernization and feel confident. In transport, there was a transition of industrial transportations from river transport to automobile. The value of a riverway Volga-Don fell, therefore construction of Volgodon-2 channel was frozen, and traffic of Volgodon channel considerably fell within 1990-2010, however now again approaches record values. The defense enterprises of the barricade and the southern production of Viets. Shipyard.
After crisis of the 1990th years, received state orders on production of arms and carry out modernization.
The industry.
Red October aluminum plant.
Processing raw materials and the enterprises. Volgograd, the plant of the boring equipment, the plant of Petrov. Making the equipment for extraction of raw materials is in strong dependence on a world environment, and at each all Russian recession reduce or stop production. The fate of Viets can be an example of unsuccessful fate of heavy mechanical engineering.
Before the plant, which gave the name to Traktorozavodski district, was one of the largest, the producer of caterpillars, DD-75 producer, the most Massachusetts in the USA.
More than 2 million tractors. However, the civil industry needs first of all wheel tractors, and the plant could not provide competitive products and now is in a condition of bankruptcy. The Ulma Corporation, which in crisis of 1998 purchased the ruined Volgograd plaster plant, can be an example of successful destiny. On its base arranged effective production of construction mixes and gypsum cardboard, and became one of leaders of this market in Russia. Tourist capacity of the city is used poorly, despite the available tourist magnets. Monuments of the Battle of Stalingrad, Sarepta, rest and fishing in the Volga-Akubinsk floodplain, a way to Elton. The chance of involvement of tourists in connection with holding the FIFA World Cup in 2018, under which in the city hotels and the Victory Stadium are under construction, was represented. The plant of tractor details and normals, the plant of transport mechanical engineering, the engine building plant, Kimpram, shipbuilding plant, medical equipment factory, Vesma stopped the existence. The city is in very difficult economic situation, at the poorest of the cities of Russia with the million population. Also, Volgograd possesses some more anti-records among the cities of its size. The lowest wages, 19,000 rubles for 2013. The most worn-out infrastructure, the smallest number of small businesses for 1,000 of the population, 29.6 in 2012.
And at the same time, the highest salaries of officials among regions of the Southern Federal District, on average rubles.
Badge to the 20th anniversary of the Volgograd Drilling Department. No. 1 enterprise. Brand of Aves. Option from aluminum. Volgograd can be provided in the center of a 6-pointed star of the departing federal and regional roads. The city crosses Route P.
Moscow-Astrakhan.
Routes begin P. to Syzran, P. to Elista, A. to Donetsk, P. through Volsky to Samara, P. to Tikoretsk through Katalnikovo and Salsk, and also the regional road 18R-1 through Volsky to Astrakhan. The bypass road for transit transport is only partially in a northern part of the city. The third longitudinal that forces to move down further on the second longitudinal, going on urban development. Volga, it is possible to move on a dam of hydroelectric power station to Volsky or on Volgogradsky Bridge to Krasnoslobodsk. From the central bus station, regular bus routes across Russia and also to the republics of Transcaucasia and Central Asia are organized. Railway passenger gate of the city, Volgograd-1 station, for cargo transportation. Earlier and suburban. Is used also Volgograd-2 station. Both stations belong to the Volgograd office of the Volga Railroad. From these stations there are 4 directions. Moscow. At lovely branches on the Moscow and Saratov direction. Astrakhan, Krasnodar, Rostov.
Air gate of the city is the international airport Gumruk, located in the settlement of Gumruk in 10 kilometers from Volgograd.
In the southern part of the city, Volga-Don Canal, a link of a single deep water system through which the city on water is connected with the Caspian, Black, Baltic and White Sea, Moscow and St. Petersburg begins. Volgograd accepts passenger and tourist flights on Central Neo embankment, at the mooring of the river station, cargo, in river port Tatyanka. The specifics of road network of Volgograd come from its unusual form. A strip of building from 1 to 5 wide and about 60 kilometers long, in which multi-storied complex building, the private sector, industrial zones, sites of the vacant steppe several times alternates. So it developed historically. The city grew along Volga industrial enterprises and settlements with all necessary infrastructure.
On length, Volgograd is crossed by 3 main longitudinal thoroughfares.
The first, second and third longitudinal. The longitudinal is the everyday name reflecting a real situation. Legally it is a chain of different streets. The first longitudinal. From the north on the south. Nikolai Otrada Street, Lenin Avenue, Workers and Peasants, a name of Leo Tolstoy, Elektrosavsoskaya. Closest to Volga. 3 kilometers.
Crosses the center, exactly along it almost all sites of the city are located.
The second longitudinal. From the north on the south.
Militant, Eryumenko, Lermontova, Rokossovsky, Cherepovets, Universitetsky Avenue, the 64th Army, Kolosovaya, Limonovaya, Roslevel, Sandy, Azure, Giroev, Stalingrad Avenue, plus 40 years of the All Union Leninist and Communist League.
The most extended and loaded. Bypass the third longitudinal allows to go around only northern and central parts of the city. To get on the city south, it is necessary to leave on the second longitudinal. A situation with bypass roads heavy, with growth of number of motor transport, it became easier to get to the next district centers of area, than on other end of the city. Actually the city is broken off on the north and the south, poorly connected among themselves. For the Soviet period, the Volgograd bus traffic developed in the scheme, typical for the regional centers of the USSR. From certain residential districts and settlements, bus routes came to a kernel of the area, from where other routes on the busiest streets went to the downtown to automobile and railway stations.
The park of city buses was also typically Soviet.
POS-672 and POS-32053 at the departmental enterprises, LIAS-677 and LAS-695 on intracity flights, to the district centers went Ikarusa. For post-Soviet time, the scheme of the intracity message partially changed.
Departmental buses almost disappeared when changing patterns of ownership of the enterprises from state on private, all city pat.
The passenger motor transportation enterprise were reduced in the uniform operator Suvo Volgograd Avtotrans. Almost all former park of intracity buses is replaced with new models native of the Volga region -5270, Liaz -5256, Liaz -5293, POS -3204, POS -3237. The park of long-distance buses was replaced with more comfortable, as well as in the majority of the cities of Russia, buses are competed by share taxis on Gazelle family models in most cases. Long-distance bus traffic is performed from two bus stations, the main, Central, in the Central District, and the Yushny bus station serving the southern regional directions. Due to the preparation for the World Cup of 2018 events for transfer of the central bus station on the territory, adjacent to the Gumruk airport, for the purpose of construction of the new modern building and withdrawal from the central district of Volgograd overloaded with motor transport were held. The idea of transfer of bus station causes complaints. In 2017 at public hearings, transfer of bus station, but not to the airport, was approved, and is much closer. Tsaritsyn became the first district city of Russia which constructed to itself the tram. In 1913 the existing line which laid the foundation for the Volgograd tram was laid.
Now the tram system consists of 3 lines which are not connected among themselves, one of which, the high-speed tram, includes ordinary for inhabitants of Volgograd and surprising city visitors the underground tram.
6 stations built according to the standard of the subway. They are built on outgrowth and wait when other northern and southern stations also are reconstructed, and on all line subway trains will go. And now, surprising tourists, on huge monumental stations there are 2 compound Tatar-T trams which are a basis of the tram park.
For post-Soviet time, the operator of the city Volgograd Public Electric Transport of Metro Electrotrans Municipal Unitary Enterprise, the park of trams is slightly updated by EVA V-2009 models.
10 pieces. And 71,409. 1 piece. Total length of tram network is 137.1 km and 13 routes. Opening on December 31, 1962, the first line of the Volgograd trolleybus along a route, the railway station Volgograd-1, the lower settlement of Viets, became a New Year's gift to citizens. For last half a century, trolleybus routes are laid to one and all districts of the city. A basis of the park was U-9 and trolls a -5275.06 models of Optim. Total length of trolleybus network is 159 km and 14 routes. In 1959 the first route of the city electric train is started up. For 2015 the Volgograd city electric train consists of 5 lines and 11 routes. From them 7 regional. Except Volgograd serving Volsky, Katalnikovo, Surovikino. The electric train, the only type of the passenger electric transport which routes are laid on all extent of the city, from the Yuzhny station to the northern station, Spartanovka, further, to the satellite town of Volsky. The center of network is the railway station Volgograd-1. The first mentions of the organization of primary education in Tsaritsyno belong to 1808. The city magistrate signed a contract with the retired Sergeant Ivan Vlasov on education of children, how many at Nabratetskin. The first, to read, the second, to write copybooks and a symphony board, the third, the arithmetician in 4 parts. Also at churches of Tsaritsyno there are parish schools. But it was only training to write, consider and to fundamentals of orthodoxy. The beginning of system education is begun from 1880 years when more than 10 educational institutions are founded. Funds from the city budget were allocated for it, a considerable part was occupied by the help of the Tsaritsyno entrepreneurs. In 1911 in Tsaritsyno was available 14 men's, 9 women's and 2 mixed schools. The school was meant as all educational institutions, but at the time they were divided into gymnasiums. More prestigious classical education with profound studying of Latin, ancient Greek and foreign languages. And proto-gymnasiums. Since 1871 real schools, less prestigious applied education.
The building of the first Tsaritsyno Gymnasium, Alexandrovsky 1875, now the southern wing of the building of regional administration to the address Lenin Avenue 9, and the building of the first real school of 1881, a northern wing of the same building reached our days in a reconstructed type.
All 4 buildings of female gymnasiums reached our time. No. 1 ministerial. That is state, in the 19th century there was such division of schools.
Mariinsky, it is founded in 1877, now management of regional statistics on Chaikov Street 7, 2 ministerial, founded in 1908, now the 83rd High School on Lenin Avenue 21, no.
3 private Madam Stetsenko, now music school, no.
1 on Pushkin Street 13, for a ministerial female gymnasium, now the Cossack Theatre on Akademicheskaya Street. 3 The building of parish school of the Church of the Ascension opened in 1887, now the house on Tsiolkovsky Street 15A remained.
After the revolution and civil war all schools are transferred to the Soviet standards of education. General school free education is entered, the number of schools increased repeatedly.
In the 1930th years the foundation for the higher education which graduates developed the most important fields of activity of the city till present is laid. Industrial Teacher Training College 1931, Construction Institute 1931.
It is disbanded on other higher education institutions in 1933, again it is created in 1963. Tractor Institute 1930, Medical Institute 1935. To allow time the pre-war building of the Tractor University to the address Degtyaryov Street. 2 remained, it belongs to the university and in it departments of an evening and correspondence coursework.
For other higher educational institutions after the Battle of Stalingrad monumental buildings in the central district are built.
In military 1944 the Agricultural Institute. In the city of Uryupinsk of the Stalingrad region, since 1948 in Stalingrad. 1957 Musical School. It is reopened from the Tsaritsyno Musical School conducting history since 1917.
1960 Institute of Physical Culture. In 1967 is opened the Higher Investigative School Ministry of Internal Affairs. In 1980 the Volgograd State University is open.
In 1929 there began training of military pilots the Stalingrad Flying School. In 1942 in connection with approach of the front line is evacuated to Kostany. In 1946 the school did not return to the destroyed Stalingrad, and was transferred to Novosibirsk where it is disbanded in 1960. The Kachinsky Aviation School transferred to Stalingrad in 1954, and existing before disbandment in 1998 began to be based on the existing infrastructure of the Stalingrad School. After 1991 Orthodox University. 1993. And some other non-state higher education institutions are open, and branches of higher education institutions of other Russian cities opened. As of 2014 in Volgograd 244 kindergartens, 123 comprehensive schools, 15 gymnasiums, 10 lyceums, 12 boarding schools, 18 schools of arts, 27 sports school, 9 music schools.
Piet alate for museum matter in Saritsino the foundation, having presented in 1722 to citizens the cap and a cane.
Piet's gift was not unique, it is a usual cherry stick and a felt headdress, but thanks to the legendary personality they became the first city relics, and the whole next years are shown till present as museum pieces. But it were exhibits of city magistrate. Present an analogue, the mayor's office. And the first museum of Saritsino, local history, is founded in 1914 in the building of the House of Science and Arts. Now it is located in the building of the former Territorial Justice. In 1937 the Soviet power founded the second museum of the city, the Museum of the Battle of Tsaritsyn of a name of Comrade Stalin. And the following 1938 his director and the founder -5, M. Alekhiev is arrested and shot. After the Battle of Stalingrad the museum was complemented with numerous exhibits of 1942, 1943, and became the Museum, Defenses of Saritsino Stalingrad of Companion Stalin. In 1984 the museum, Battle of Stalingrad, is founded, Second World War exhibits are transferred to its monumental building Panoramas, and the museum began to specialize in the Battle of Tsaritsyn again. Since 1991, unlike Soviet period, it is devoted to memory of both parties of civil war, including the White Guard. The Museum Panorama, Battle of Stalingrad, became the biggest and known museum of Volgograd. It is located on the place of the Pensionat of Defense, groups of buildings along Pensionskaya Street. Now Soviet, which were defended by the 13th Division of Guards. The museum complex includes Gergarts Mill, a panorama, defeat of fascist troops near Stalingrad, the biggest picturesque cloth of Russia, exposure of military equipment of the 1940th years, a stele of the cities of heroes, numerous exhibits of weapon and awards, personal belongings of military life of generals and ordinary soldiers. Aero located the Pavlov's house which endured fights.
In 1960 the Volgograd Museum of Fine Arts of Mashkov, specializing in works of the Stalingrad/Volgograd artists and sculptors, opened the doors.
In the 1989 the Museum Old Sarepta, devoted to memory of the German colonists of the 18th century, opened. The museum became a kernel of the centers of the German, Kalmyk, Tatar and Russian culture. The library in German is open. Based on the plant of the weight measuring equipment in 2009, the Museum of Measures and Scales is open.
In the historical building of the city pumping station in 2010, the Museum of the City devoted to city water supply Vodoccanal is open.
On October 5, 2017, in the downtown, in the floodplain of the River of the Queen, the Interactive Museum Park, Russia, My History, more than 7,000 square. I'm equipped with a projective dome, holograms, audio guides, sound and light systems opened. The museum is implemented within the all-Russian project Russia, My History. To the second half of the 19th century, the theatre in Tsaritsyno existed in the form of national buffooneries. The Saratov chief of police in 1872 gives the first mention of emergence of theatre. In the Saratov province there are 3 theatres. 2 in Saratov summer and winter, the third in the private stone building belonging to the merchant Kalinin also contains in Tsaritsyno the honorable citizen Alexander Astapov, on Theatre Yaroslavtsev.
In 1882, on the place of the present station of a metro tram, Pioneer, in the floodplain of the Queen, there was a garden and a station.
So then called open air stage. Concordia, they become first musical theatre of the city. Concordia in 1905 is bought by the Tsaritsyno industrialist Vladimir Miller and builds the new building of theatre on 1,300 seats. This record is not reached by the city, and now, Volgograd has no such big premises of theatres. Concordia turns into the opera, well known to all Russia, where Feitner, Shilipin, Sabinev and other outstanding actors acted. In 1913, the Tsaritsyno merchant, the patron and the amateur tenor Repnikov builds the building of the House of Science and Arts at Alexandrovskaya Square, where the Tsaritsyno Drama Theatre gives representations. During World War I and Civil Wars, in buildings of theatres there are infirmaries for wounded. From the 1922nd in the former Concordia, the Stalingrad Theatre of the Musical Comedy, future Volgograd Musical Theatre, and in the former House of Science and Arts, the Stalingrad Musical and Drama Theatre, future Net gives the first representations. In the 1933, the City Theatre for Young Audience gave the first premiere.
In 1937, the amateur puppet theatre of Timber Mill is recognized by professional collective and through series of renamings became Regional Puppet Theatre.
In the next years, theatres opened. Volgograd Solo Performance 1989, Volgograd Musical and Drama Cossack Theatre 1992, Tsaritsyno Opera 1993, Volgograd Youth Theatre 2006. Volgograd Laboratory of Modern Theatre 2008, the first drama theatre 2012. Concordia in 100 years carries on tradition of debuts of orchestra, the Volgograd Academic Symphonic Orchestra. In the city there are 2 bodies, in the Central Concert Hall and Lutheran Church of the Museum of Sarepta.
In 1915, Vladimir Miller, on the place of the present house on Lenin Street, 6, constructed the Tsaritsyno's first Parnas movie theatre, which in 2 years was nationalized and received the new name, Red Army Man.
From 1920th years, all city churches, except Kazan Cathedral, were closed and converted into clubs, libraries and movie theatres. So in movie theatres, churches of Pentecost. On this place the apartment house on Chapayev Street, 26. The Troitsky Church of the Duma plant and some other are converted. In the growing industrial settlements of Stalingrad, new buildings of movie theatres were under construction. Some of them are destroyed in days of the Battle of Stalingrad, some are transferred to new, more monumental buildings. Till 1991 in Volgograd tens of movie theaters worked, now from Soviet, show cinema only in Drummer of Traktorozavodsky district. Other old movie theaters did not sustain the competition to modern multiplex at shopping centers. For 2015, 15 movie theaters. From them 8 in technology and Cinepark in Europe Shopping Center in IMAX technology work in the city. Construction of planetarium was dated for Stalin's 70th anniversary coming in 1949. Terms of commissioning of the object dragged on. The planetarium is handed over in 1954, but dedication elements to anniversary, figure 70 in plafonds of lamps and other elements of a decor remain so far.
Also Stalin's portrait panel from semi-precious stones which is laid out in the planetarium foyer remained.
It was accurately imaged after Stalin's death and without damages is open in 2004. The special equipment for planetarium is presented by Carl Zeiss from the Dieder.
The planetarium became the third in the USSR after Moscow and Kiev and one of the most monumental and beautiful among planetaria of the USSR.
The Stalingrad Circus is constructed in 1932 in Traktorozavodsky district. The prosecutor Vyshinsky opened circus. The building was destroyed in the Battle of Stalingrad and as circus it was not restored. It is the vegetable market now. The present building of the Volgograd Circus is opened in the Central District in 1967.
The paid reading room at bookstore of Pavlova opened in 1894, though there were already libraries closed for public at the public meeting, and the territorial justice became the first library in Saritsino. The first public library opened in 1900 by means of the Saritsino patron Lapshin in the building of one fire brigade.
In 20 pre-war years there was a huge breakthrough in development of library science. Tens of libraries at educational institutions, the plants in industrial settlements were open. Almost all their book fund died in days of war, but is revived and increased for post-war years.
Now in Volgograd tens of libraries, including Regional Library of Gorky and the Volgograd Regional Special Library for Blind People work.
In 2014-2016 in the territory of Volgograd optimization of structure of municipal libraries was performed. In 2014-2016 all 11 rooms were freed, including these are branches No.
5, 14, 16 and 19 and also children's libraries No.
11, 15 and 16. The book fund is localized in larger libraries, and readers are transferred to the next libraries. In 2017 it is going to optimize 5 more libraries from 50 remained.
Thus, one branch of library in the million-plus city of Volgograd satisfies requirements more than 2,000 people. In total in Russia 44500 of libraries, the population makes 144.1 million people.
One library on average provides access to literature to 30 to 38 Russians.
The option of a legend of origin of the first name of the city, Tsaritsyn, is stated in the epic novel by the ethnographer fiction writer P.
Melnikov Pekiorsky, On the Mountains. Chapter 15. Udalostovya team quietly drove up the Khan. Golden Horde. 2 windows. Also sees. A star of Kurasan. The beloved wife. Her Shrudnitsa and slaves in light clothes, with cheerful faces, face all the gyre dressed in a parcheva, sing some lad song. Here the star of Kherson approaches the gyre and kisses it on lips. Sveta was not invited by the furious Khan, shouted team, rushed into chambers and enjoined to beat all who here were. And there was that on the night of light Christ Sunday when, at the end of Matins, the star of Kherson, the secret Christian, the first with the priest Christosovatsia. The palace was burned, remains exterminated it, trees and gardens chopped. The place became empty. And the small river that near the palace proceeded, nicknamed the small river the Queen since then. And still she is so called. On Volga on the one hand the city of Tsaritsyn stands the mouth of the Queen, with another the Cossack Slobodka, and behind it immense steppes, and on them nomadic tilt carts of Kalmyks. To the second half of the 19th century Tsaritsyn remained the small district city with the population in several thousands of people. In literature of the time it remained only in sketches of travelers. Exceptions make descriptions of revolts of Pugachev, Bulavin, Razin.
From the second half of the 19th century Tsaritsyn wins the status of industrial and shopping center of the region. A mention and the description of new merchant and craft way of his life on pages of books and newspapers began to appear much more often.
In the 20th century on city life the Battle of Stalingrad had a huge impact, having divided all spheres of life including culture, on to and later. Therefore today documentary and works of art about Tsaritsyn, Stalingrad, Volgograd are divided into three main periods. Queens and pre-war Stalingrad. Works. A sketch, the Tsaritsyn Big Fire of A. 1. Caprine, 1901. The feature film Battle of Tsaritsyn, 1942. The novel by I.K. Rebrev Predators about construction of Volga-Don Railroad, 1959. Battle of Stalingrad. The most mentioned period which found reflection in the greatest number of works of art about battles in the city.
With development of technologies there were computer games in which in three-dimensional space according to photos and topographic maps buildings of Stalingrad of 1942-1943 where there were most known street fights are simulated.
Volgograd revived from ruins. Works. The poem which became The Birch Grows in Volgograd song by Margarita Agashina, 1962.
All 3 years of history of the city found reflection in the poem Tu Tsaritsyn Stalingrad Volgograd of the Volgograd poet Pavel Velikanin.
The city architecture endured several waves of destructions.
The first began in 1880, the 1910th years when for this period the population and city economy grew more than by 10 times.
Suddenly grown rich city took down the log huts and sheds which lived up to this period a remaining balance of fortifications and in bulk and built smart shops, hotels and profitable houses.
The construction boom of 1870-1910 swept away Fortress Poludar New Tsaritsyn almost completely, except for temples. The following wave fell on civil and possible devotion behind it ideological war.
At this time temples of all faiths either were destroyed, or buildings of other appointment were reconstructed. In 1932 the oldest structure of the city minus 300-year street. Jean the Baptist Church is destroyed. Huge damage was caused by the Great Patriotic War when Stalingrad became the combat zone. The Soviet cinematographers removing the pseudo-documentary chronicle, and for an effective personnel, the blowing up buildings which survived in fights contributed to destruction of the city.
In post-war years, restoration of Stalingrad was conducted according to the plan of the city, with spacious streets and avenues in which the pre-war architecture had the right to life only if did not disturb new highways of the city. Nearest street, Geroev Avenue, Lenin Avenue.
In the 1960th years, the house is restored after the Battle of Stalingrad, in which 15-20 years after war there lived people communicated. Nevertheless, Volgograd managed to keep particles of complex building nearly every era, and the number of certain buildings in post-war quarters is estimated in hundreds. In general, there was only nothing from walls and bastions of Fortress Tsaritsyn. 1770–1820. The oldest in the city houses of the German colony of Gurngüter in Sarepta, now the Museum of Sarepta. Lutheran Church. 1772, the oldest building of Volgograd.
The distillery, library, the house of unmarried women, the house of single men, and other buildings of this era were built around the small area.
Sarepta is in very deplorable state. Only a few buildings are restored, the others gradually pass from critical condition into ruins. The 1900 years. District Tsaritsyn partially remained in Bykatotka. Nikita Confessor's Church 48E and 44E Alevgao. 1795, oldest remained. Feriskev Pyatnitsy Church 48E and 44E Alevgao. The end of the 18th century. Reached our days. The oldest wooden log huts of the 19th century, from the wood, come here on the Volga Bolyana, including Shumilow's log hut 48E and 44E, Alevgao, where in days of the Second World War the headquarters of the 64th Army was placed, remained. 1880–1915. One of features of architecture of Volgograd, the hidden small streets, within perimeter of monumental Stalin building. Unexpectedly there are Tsaritsino lodges, often at an angle from the existing streets, repeating contours of not existing fortification long ago. The hidden small streets Pushkina, Volodarsk, Khersanova remained on Ostrovsky streets. The Tsaritsinsky merchants most of all liked the Russian style of a current, popular in the 19th century. Historicism is the most widespread historical style of the city. Buildings in other style our time was reached by a little. The meat body of 1910 in modernist style, the Mariinsky Female Gymnasium of 1877 in style classicism. 1910–1912. As to the ally in future World War I, England on behalf of Vickers helped to construct the Tsaritsino artillery plant and housing for workers. Its settlement, the lower barricades, became history as the island of Lyudnikovan was strongly destroyed, but the most part of buildings is restored in 1943–1945 in original form. Now Pribaltiskaya Street 48E and 44E, Alevgao and Volsky Avenue 48E and 44E, Bidyaudyatel, as well as other English working quarters of the beginning of the 20th century, with small impregnations of post-war Stalin building. The 1920th years. The country these years began to be restored after shocks of 1914–1920, but speed was not achieved yet. Therefore houses of style socialist constructivism were scattered on the city as well as were under construction, one by one. House of Visitors, Tatarbas garment factory of a name on March 8. The 1930th years. Very powerful decade from a point of influence on architecture of Stalingrad. There was a numerous complex building on all city, except the central district where after war decided to build from blank sheet. The most numerous. More than 50 buildings. Volgograd of the tractor plant, Jasinski Street and other streets of the top and lower tractor settlements. Represents the socialist mini-city with huge schools, institute, catering establishment, movie theater, circa May, N44E LFGAO. Now the vegetable market with a standard circus diameter -16 meters. Parks, the embankment. Suffered in war, but it is restored in the 40th years almost in the same style, post-war stallions.
To Jasinski's address, 32 there is Don E and 44E LFGAO, at the end face reflected the history of the street.
Socialist construction, the inscription, on the third year of the second 5 years period -1930. The Battle of Stalingrad, numerous chips of a brick from bullets and splinters, a large hole from the exploded shell, dilapidation, our time. In the 1930th years in the city the famous American architect Albert Kahn, famous for building of Detroit, worked. In Stalingrad it worked on objects of the tractor plant and experimental Volgograd of workers. 1950, the 1960th years.
Volgograd revived from ruins, a post-war Stalin Empire style. This architectural style became the hallmark of the city. Almost an original form architectural complexes of this direction decorate Volgograd.
From losses of this period, the Soviet neon advertising on roofs of buildings. 1970, the 1988 years. These years a lot of standard housing, 5-story apartment blocks in Breznica is built, but there are almost no sign buildings. Exceptions, circular buildings of the Panorama, the river station. The largest in Europe and Russia. White Stork restaurant. The 1990th. This decade apartment houses were not under construction, but it left the mark in the private sector, building of prestigious places near Volga by private houses of new Russians. Boys, built in the idea of fine. The huge house with windows, small, similar to the loopholes, ridiculous for the usual house of a column, an extension to the house of a porch in the form of the parody to an old Russian tower from a low-quality red brick. The Ord till present. During this period renewed high-rise construction, including housing estates. New houses for the first time after Stalin began to try to make beautiful, but already in a modern type. In the private sector sense of proportion, new houses even in the budgetary option harmonious, with large windows, with facades from a facing brick more and more appears. Since 2014 preparation to the city to matches of the FIFA World Cup is conducted. At the bottom of Mamayev Kurgan the international stadium, Volgograd Arena, is constructed. Besides, to the World Cup in the city 3 training sites based on Academy of Physical Culture and Sport, SKS, Olympia and Zenit Stadium are constructed and reconstructed. 3 new hotels. A reconstructed clinical hospital of emergency medical service No. 25 with construction in its territory of the helipad. Roads. with a total length of 280 km. Utilities, number of objects of the airport. The oldest of remained, a monument to Gogol of 1910 in the Komsomol Garden near Net Theatre. Survived because the writer Gogol had no relation to the power and policy. All other monuments to statesmen of an imperial era are destroyed in the 1920th years. Also 3 pre-war monuments reached our days. To Ehrman 1925, Jasinski 1935 and to Holzenov 1940.
Entered war with damages, and it is restored after the standard Barmely fountain. However, in 1951 it is demolished as not being art value.
But thanks to the well-known photo of Evserikin which showed horror of war, sculptures of a children's round dance against the background of the burning city, and over the years the Battle of Stalingrad which became a symbol, the remark of the fountain is recreated at Provoxelnaya Square. After the war, in key places of fights, numerous monuments of the Battle of Stalingrad are established. 3 the destroyed buildings are left as monuments. Gergards Mill, Ostrov of Lyadnikov, factory laboratory of the Red October plant. A connection of the Volgodonchik Canal and Volga in 1952. The huge sculpture of Stalin, later replaced with Lenin's sculpture, the biggest in the world to really living person, is constructed. For the Khrushchev's period, numerous standard monuments to Stalin are demolished, and the same numerous standard monuments to Lenin are established. On a roof of planetarium in 1954, the latest work of Vera Mukina, World, is established.
In 1967 on Mame of Kurgan the sculpture is constructed. The motherland calls, at the time of creation the highest statue in the world, and now
2020. The 11th of the list of the highest.
For residents of the Usser it became a symbol of Volgograd, and for foreigners together with the poster the motherland calls.
Idea of Mother Russia. Also symbols of the city sculptures in the last ditch and the grieving mother began die. The front line between the Red Army and Wehrmacht for the heaviest moment for the Soviet troops, November 1942 notes a monument, the line of defense, a chain from tank towers of T-34, 3 more T-34 tanks stand on pedestals within the city. After reorganization, military monuments are delivered. Died in World War I in Afghanistan, in wars in the North Caucasus, to the Cossacks who left on war. In Volgograd are established. A monument in honor of the basis of Saritsino. 1589-1989. To the first voivode of Saritsino, Grigory II, the heavenly patron of the city, Alexander Nevsky, blessing, a monument to Saints Piet and Favronia, protected from atom, a monument to liquidators of consequences of the Chernobyl accident.
Also for the first time in the city, monuments without historical or patriotic occasion began to appear.
The guardian angel, the first teacher, a sculpture, knowledge, force, the biker, the motorist, Kopik, a sculpture of lovers, happiness, horseshoe, the girl with an accordion, a stork with the newborn, the going hippopotamus, dogs, a cat and a cat. Embankments occupy no more 1/10 part of total length. About 60 kilometers. Of the coast and alternate with industrial zones. Such provision developed since the beginning of the 20th century, when from the downtown on the north and the south industrial complexes with the industrial settlements began to be under construction. The oldest central Nea embankment was river port and a trade warehouse since foundation of the city. In the 1930th years on it demolished wooden piers and merchant warehouses, concreted the coast, planted trees and flower beds, laid walking avenues. In the Battle of Stalingrad the central embankment is destroyed and after war is reconstructed in style a Stalin Empire style, having become one of the most beautiful Volga embankments. In Traktorozavodsky, Krasnoyarski, Kirovsky and Krasnoarmysky district there are also embankments built in 1930, the 1950th years. Then they were lit, decorated with beds of flowers, shops, standard plaster Soviet statues. For the late Soviet period and especially for the post-Soviet period this infrastructure is lost.
Now these embankments became just concreted coast, they are used for bathing, sports activities and fishermen, but performs function of a walking recreation area only central.
The city authorities began to be engaged in park arrest of citizens in the middle of the 18th century.
In 1886 the oldest park of the city, the Komsomol Garden on the place of the Skorbiashensky cemetery of the 17th century which ceased to be used for designated purposes open. The Concordia Park in the floodplain of the River the Queen was the central park of Suritsino before revolution, did not remain in the 20th century.
In the 1930th years near industrial settlements of the Stalingrad Enterprises parks are mortgaged, all of them endured war and were used for a designated purpose before reorganization. Now their destiny is various. A part fitted into new realities, their cafe and attractions, a part are thrown. In the 1960th years in the Central District the Central Park of Culture and Leisure, the biggest park of Volgograd is mortgaged.
The big free areas in the downtown arose because of the solution of post-war city authorities not to restore oil depot.
The former oil depot Nably, which is destroyed in days of the Battle of Stalingrad, and to move oil works to the southern outskirts of the city. In the 90s the park experienced desolation, now is restored with assistance of the government of Azerbaijan and wins former love of citizens. The team of football players of the Duma Plant 1916, the first team of the city. Sport history in the city begins with transition from rural and merchant to industrial and city tenor of life in the second half of the 19th century.
Together with foreign specialists of the Duma plants and Nobly oil depots interest in soccer came.
Its history in Suritsino began in 1909 with the Storm and Standard teams of the Duma plant which arranged well the waste ground under the football field. Now the oldest stadium of Volgograd, Monolith, for holding matches. From football players of this team in 1916 the Republic team is made. In 1925 the professional Dynamo team is based. From 1930th years the sport purchased value of the state importance, the city authorities carried out huge work on creation of gyms, stadiums, pools on all areas. In 1929 the tractor builder team, Future Rotor is based. After the Battle of Stalingrad sports life of the city is revived, date of the first football match, speaks on May 2, 1943 about a sport priority for the city authorities. In 3 months after liberation of Stalingrad. In post-war time teams are based. Handball Dynamo and Caustic Soda, water polo Spartak, basketball, Red October, football Olympia. In 1960 there began work the Academy of Physical Culture. For the period 1920-1980 numerous sports constructions, the biggest of them are constructed. Tractor Stadium,
1931. Central Stadium, 1962. Sports Palace, 1967. Central Basin, 1967. Zenit Stadium, 1980.
During the post-Soviet period, the Olympia Stadium is constructed. To the FIFA World Cup of 2018, the football stadium, Volgograd Arena, located on the place of the Central Stadium, is constructed.
The sports infrastructure developed during the Soviet period generated the famous Volgograd athletes.
Isinbayeva, Slesarenko, Opelov, Petrov, Elchenko and other world champions and Olympic Games. In 2018, Volgograd hosted 4 matches of the FIFA World Cup. For this purpose in the city, the modern stadium, Volgograd Arena, is constructed. This stadium accommodates 45,000 people, includes places for the press, VIP places and places for representatives of handicapped groups of the population. On 62nd Armia embankment for fans of soccer, the Festival of Fans of FIFA is organized. It passed in all days of a tournament. Fans could look at matches on the big screen and also visit entertaining zones and points of a food. To a Festival of Fans of FIFA there came the famous foreign bands of Arash and Kadabostani. The organization of healthcare in the city began in 1807 with entry in the city budget. Spend 10727 rubles for construction, the business house for patients, the shed, doctor rooms with drugstore and for fences, and those years were meant by patients infected with cholera, typhus, plague whose epidemics periodically captured Tsaritsyn. In 1807 the first health worker, the graduate of the street, Petersburg Povovolny Institute Yuliana Andreeva appeared. Till 1890 years the city had only territorial hospital on 40 beds. By 1913 Tsaritsyn had 4 hospitals and 4 outpatient clinics, 135,000 of the population served only 35 doctors. For the Soviet period, inhabitants of Volgograd of all age were covered by urban health care. For the post-Soviet period began to function a microsurgery branch, 1988. Russian Academy of Medical Science Orthopedy Scientific Center and Orthopedic Cosmetology, 1992, nowadays, the Volgograd City Center of Orthopedics and Orthopedic Cosmetology. Cardiological Center, 1997. Perinatal Center, 2010. Hemodialysis Center, 2015. The first newspaper in Tsaritsino, Volga and Don Listok, appeared on January 2, 1885. Its founder and the real editor-in-chief Shigmanovsky is expelled from the street. Petersburg University, for participation in illegal student circles, was registered unreliable and therefore used as the publisher the figurehead, the retired Lieutenant Petrov. In 1897 Zhigmanovsky achieved the edition of the new newspaper already under the name, Tsaritsino Bulletin. The newspaper became the most production in the city and appeared till 1917. After the revolution the edition of this newspaper was stopped. The new authorities began to issue the Borba newspaper, which through series of renamings became the Volgograd Truth, and nearly 100 years is the official newspaper of the city authorities. Also in the city there are local newspapers. City Messages, Evening Volgograd, a local tab in Komsomolskaya Pravda. The Stalingrad radio began work on September 5, 1933, and works with a break for 1942-1943 till present, now as a component of Radio of Russia. Regular telecasting in Volgograd began on March 16, 1958, after completion of construction of a television center on Mamayev Kurgan. At once in shops of the city there was an excessive demand for TZ. There was a Cold War, TZ was subject to obligatory accounting and the Regional Committee of Party knew their exact quantity in 1959. 140215 Stalingrad, 2086 in Volsky, 527 in adjacent villages. For 2015 the Volgograd News telecasting two public channels, Regional Division of Volgograd Tver Russia -24 channel and MTV. Perform Municipal Television of Volgograd. The contemporaries who brought the contribution of forces and talent to the solution of the major problems of the time became honorable citizens. In Merchant Tsaritsino it is the patrons donating means for education and health care. Then fighters and commanders of the Red Army, participants of the Battle of Tsaritsyn and Battle of Stalingrad. From 1950th years metallurgists, architects, artists became honorable citizens. On May 14, 1919, the Honorable Revolutionary Red Banner is appropriated to the first of the cities. On April 19, 1924, the highest award of the Soviet Russia, the award of the Red Banner.
Now the exhibit of Memorial Estate, Battle of Stalingrad, is an exposure of the Memorial and Historical Museum.
Results of the Battle of Stalingrad. The Order of the Supreme Commander I-5. Stalin of May 1, 1945 No. 20 Leningrad, Stalingrad, Sevastopol and Odessa are called hero towns.
A decree of Presidium of the Supreme Council of the Hussar of May 8, 1965. The city of Volgograd is awarded with the Medal, Gold Star and the Order of Lenin.
On November 29, 1943, Winston Churchill handed to the city the sword of Stalingrad shaped under the decree of the King of Great Britain George VI.
Now the exhibit of Memorial Estate, Battle of Stalingrad, is an exposure of the museum panorama.
On June 23, 1984, the President of France François Mitterrand handed to Volgograd the award of the Honorable Legion.
Stalingrad and Coventry in 1944 became the first twin cities, having engendered this international movement.
Now Volgograd is a sworn brother of 25 cities. In many of them there is Volgogradskaya Street. In Moscow there are Volgogradsky Avenue and the metro station of the same name. A significant amount of streets, avenues, squares in the different countries is called in memory of the Battle of Stalingrad. Stalingrad called some other technical objects and terms. The metro station in Paris, an asteroid. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.